Hey friends, it's Caesar here, host of the Creepy Fox Scary Stories podcast, and thank you for clicking this special 2-hour episode of Scary Stories with no ad interruptions. That's right, this video is not clickbait, just as the title and the thumbnail says. Today's episode is presented to you all commercial free. No ads, no interruptions, just scary stories, no ads. Now, if it is the first time you're joining us and you like this sort of thing, then check out the other videos I got. Anyway, I'll see you guys at the end for another video message. But for now, enjoy the video.
I still remember this because it was around early 2017 when I just started getting into urban exploring. In my small town in Arkansas, there was this abandoned farm out in the middle of nowhere. I say middle of nowhere because you had to drive down some lonely roads off the highway in order to reach it. I'd actually never been there myself, so I called up a few friends and told them about my plans. Sadly, both of them were busy, so it was just going to be myself on my own. I ended up arriving at around 2 in the afternoon, and immediately I tried to find a way in. The farm itself looked fairly new, but it was starting to show signs of being left unattended for years. I was thinking since the main house next to the barn was locked up, I would try to find a way inside the barn at least. I do end up seeing that one of the boards in the wall of the side of the barn was missing, which meant I had a chance to get in. Yes, right at this moment, I'm sure lots of you are listening and saying, why the heck would you enter an old abandoned barn? I was a crazy kid back then. Anyway, continuing on with my submission here. Inside, it's pretty dark, no kidding, and there is still a strong smell of manure, which also made me almost barf. I sucked it up and trekked on, only to get a scare of a lifetime when I stumbled into a carcass of some sort. It looked like that of a horse, but of course, it was just all bones by this point. It definitely added to the overall atmosphere of this building. I ended up walking over to a small stable since I thought I had seen some leftover tools, and when I'm about to reach for an object on the ground, which my flashlight had shined on, I hear a noise behind me. I instantly perked up, and I said hello as I began scanning the barn with my phone's flashlight. To my surprise, watching me the entire time was a man sitting in the corner who for some strange reason I had never seen. Looking back, I think it's because from where I was standing, there was a large stack of hay blocking my view, so I hadn't originally seen them. The man appeared as if he had seen his better days, and it didn't help that he was carrying one of the largest hunting knives I'd ever seen in my life. Let's just say I don't even get a chance to say a single word, since he now starts to approach me, saying to come over here as he started to catcall me, and he said I looked really sexy. Your guess is as good as mine to what he now had planned at this point. I ended up speed racering my way out of that barn as the man actually follows me outside and begins following me to my vehicle. I am pretty much on the verge of tears at this point, just praying to God I would get to my car in time. Thank goodness I do, and without moments waste, I start the ignition and drive out of there, literally leaving this freak in the dust. About a month later, I returned with a couple of my friends, not to actually go inside the barn, mind you, but just to show them where I had my incident occur. But the barn was gone. Actually, it looked as if it had burned down in a fire. That in itself is really crazy, and it remains unexplained to who that man was, what he was doing in there, and how the barn had burned down. Definitely one of the scariest and most unexplained encounters of my entire life. When I was 26 years old, I had just married my husband. He worked as a mechanic for a truck company. One week he had to go to Salt Lake for some extra training, and since we lived an hour away, I needed to drive him out there. Then, I would spend the day with a friend until he needed to be picked up. He usually didn't get off until around 12:30 a.m., so I would sit outside and listen to creepypastas or crochet. One night he had to stay later than usual, so I got comfortable and started to work on a blanket I was making. The parking lot was next to the train tracks, and on the other side was a large empty field. There were a few trees next to the tracks, but I could still see the field regardless. Since we were out in the middle of nowhere, I had my window open and I was having a smoke. This was when I noticed something moving in the field. This was around 12:45, so I couldn't really see it. I figured it might have been a stray dog, however, wandering around and looking for some food. After I finished my smoke, I rolled up my window and I went back to my blanket. For some reason, I had this weird feeling of being watched, so I locked the doors to my car and I had the interior light on so I couldn't see the field anymore, but I felt better with the doors locked and I went back to crocheting. A few minutes later, I noticed a shadow next to my window and I looked up expecting to see my husband, only to be met with the face of a dirty, wild-eyed man. We stared at each other for what seemed like 10 minutes. Then he grabbed the door handle and started yanking on it. I screamed and grabbed my phone and I called my husband. By now I was crying. The man started pounding on the window to break the glass. My husband answered and heard my hysterical sobbing. I was so terrified I couldn't form a coherent sentence. It felt like forever went by that my husband and his co-workers came running out of the building. The man saw them and took off running into the dark. My husband stopped the car while the others ran after the man carrying tools. I opened the door and threw myself into my husband's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He held me there as he called the police. It took them about 30 minutes to get to us, and his co-workers had come back before then. The man had unfortunately gotten away. We gave our statement to the police and they left to look for him. My husband and I pretty much just went home. The next day, I saw in the news report that the man was caught after he had broke into a house 2 miles from the place where he tried to get me. He had killed an elderly woman and he used her blood to write on the walls. The only reason he was caught was because the house had a security system installed. But unfortunately, the police were too late on the response. That really made me sad, and I couldn't stop shaking and thinking what would have happened had he got into me. It's still a nightmare I live with, even all these years later. Back in the 1980s, my buddies and I had an end-of-week tradition during high school where we would hit up the local Taco Bell. It's since been torn down. Where those memories once stood are now a bunch of new apartments. As if my city doesn't already have enough traffic and people, but I digress. With me on this particular afternoon, I remember it being the fall of '84, was my girlfriend at the time, Violet, her friend Juliet, and my best friend Christian. We had ordered our usual soft tacos and drinks, and were sitting outside enjoying the fall afternoon. It was a warm but comfortable 78 degrees, and it being here in Southern California, the Santa Ana winds were prominent. We had been sitting there for approximately 20 minutes or so, and Christian comes up with the idea of going back to his place so that we could relax with a movie and also get a chance to try the new jacuzzi his parents had installed at his house. It sounded swell, but before we left, I told them I was going to head inside to take a quick piss since the walk home was about 20 minutes or so, and I knew I wasn't going to make it. Little did I know that those few minutes were actually going to be the start of something completely shocking and horrifying to say the least. I walk into the restroom and one of the employees gives me a smile, wishing me a good day. I head to the urinal, and as I'm midstream, I begin to hear police sirens in the distance, and they are getting louder. No kidding, I am then in the process of washing my hands, and it sounds like a bomb goes off. At least that's how it sounded to me. It honestly felt like time went into slow motion, and my first thought was, oh my god, Violet and the others. Not even a moment after stepping out of the restroom doors do things get even crazier, and the revelation of what the noise I hear is revealed. I will try to go slow motion here because so much happened in just a matter of a few seconds. There is what appears to be a war zone in the lobby. A truck had crashed inside, and I'm hearing a bunch of screaming. I can see Violet and the others outside through the broken glass windows, and they see me and start shouting towards me. Thank God that none of them appear to be injured. I then saw a man who crawled out of the truck front seat, and he's got a gun. He's cut up and bloody. I thought that at that moment he was going to begin firing gunshots at the employees next to me, or even me, but the employees begin to scream, and I dropped to the floor as well, as I fear for my life. However, just as quickly as he stood up, he dropped the gun and then passed out on the floor. Seeing that firsthand made me go cold, and I couldn't believe what I had witnessed. Finally, this ordeal that happened in just a few moments was over. My mind was racing a million miles an hour, and I was trying to figure out just what in the hell happened and what even led to this series of events. But anyway, once officers come in and they take us outside, it is then when I finally break down. My girlfriend embraces me into a tight squeeze, and we all sort of just start crying there, and we're left shocked. We ended up staying around as police began closing off the area, but eventually, after giving statements and even speaking to a reporter, does my dad pick us all up, and he drops my friends off at their respective homes. As for that guy, he ended up leaving in a body bag. It would later come to light that the armed man had stolen that vehicle and led the police on said wild chase. Eventually, he crashed into the Taco Bell my friends and I were eating at. Why the man chose to go out like that? It might have been the detail revealed on the news when it was found out that he was connected to a series of armed home burglaries and even some armed robberies at convenience stores, where in one he shot a store clerk who thankfully survived. But yeah, as for that guy, he ended up dying of his injuries. Needless to say, my friends and Violet would tell me that the truck had missed them by just a few inches, and had they been a bit more to their left, they would have perished as well. Apart from the driver, nobody else was seriously injured or killed. The Taco Bell closed down for a while, but it would eventually open until it closed down in late 2018. As I said before, there are now apartments there, along with a shopping center that's opening soon. While this happened roughly 40 years ago, I will never forget the day that my friends and my girlfriend could have possibly died at our local Taco Bell.
Hey everyone, so real quickly before we continue on with today's stories, hope you're enjoying today's episode so far. If you are, and you haven't already done so, then make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified of all the future uploads. Also, if you're currently subscribed, double check and make sure that you're still subscribed. Unfortunately, YouTube has a glitch where they unsubscribe people from channels for some strange reason. It happens to me too, so just double check and make sure. Anyway, let's continue on with today's scary stories.
Looking back on this, it's a little more bizarre than it is unexplained, but either way it doesn't take away from the story. So here goes. Before starting my freshman year of high school, myself and my family ended up moving to this small mountain town in Montana. Let me quickly describe where my house was located. To get to my house, you had to take a series of back roads on the other side of town to reach my little neighborhood. There were only about 6 other homes out here, but they were each spread apart pretty far. Each of the homes had huge backyards with a fence at the very end of them. Behind the homes were woods where, if you followed them long enough, you could reach the mountains. So it was summertime, and I was to start my high school years at a brand new school. Being 14 years old at the time and leaving all my friends back where I used to live was pretty difficult. Still, that didn't stop me from taking the time to go out into the nearby mountains on my own. We moved into our home at the end of June and were all settled in by early July. For the first few weeks, we really didn't do much. My parents worked all day, which left me with pretty much nothing to do. I would normally just stay inside and play video games while my parents weren't home. Eventually, after a while, I grew bored of my normal routine and started going for runs in the mornings. I would take a trail in the nearby woods and go running for a few miles. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my mom and run marathons. I always looked up to her, so I wanted to run as well. As long as you follow the trails and signs in the woods, you wouldn't have to worry about getting lost. It's when you go off the trails and into the deep wilderness where you're most likely going to get lost. It's a lot of nature out there, and as far as I knew, nobody was supposed to be out there. So one of these early mornings, I get up and leave the house at about 6:30 a.m. It was a cool 68 degrees and was perfect running weather. I normally run about 3 miles, so I was expecting to finish a little bit before 8 a.m. As I was running into the woods, I ended up changing my mind, however. Before it got too warm, I wanted to check out what else was in the woods. I walk away from the trail I normally take and start walking. I ended up walking for about 20 minutes until I reached an opening. In the distance, I was able to see what was like a water tunnel. I could also see there was a walkway right next to it, where you would walk inside if you chose to do so. I was curious, I'd never seen something like this, and so I start to make my way over. I start getting closer, and this is when I noticed just how dark it looked inside. Honestly, my curiosity got the better of me as I now started walking in. As it starts to get darker, I take out my phone and turn on the light. Yes, like you might imagine, it's dark, and I thought since this was in the middle of nowhere, I really shouldn't have any issues. But that would soon change. As I make my way around a bend, I start noticing this strange cult-like graffiti on this side of the tunnel. Most of the drawings were what looked to be like pentagrams and other demonic images and phrases. Strange and somewhat creepy, but my best guess was that this had been done some time ago. Still, even with me telling myself all these things, I now decided it was a perfect time to leave. So I start making my way to the exit, and this is when I started to hear what sounds like footsteps behind me. I looked behind me, but I don't notice anything at first. So I continue walking thinking I was just hearing things, and right as I'm about to exit, I hear more footsteps, followed by someone clearing their throat. I turn around, and this time I see what looks like a homeless man in all black clothing, slowly starting to make their way over to me. I also notice that they're holding a huge knife. At this sight, I quickly make my way out of there, and I don't end up looking back. I, of course, ended up telling my parents about it, but they never did believe me. Here's the part that really got to me. I later returned in the school year with a couple of friends to that exact same spot. Now the entrance to the tunnel was closed off by metal bars. I'll tell you right now, those bars weren't installed when I first went there. So whoever was in there, I'm not exactly sure who you are, but I hope I don't have to experience something like this again, because that was one of the creepiest moments of my life. I'm 28 years old and I live in San Bernardino, California with my family for my entire life. Same house and everything. If that city sounds familiar, yeah, we were in the news in December of 2015 due to that shooting. Yes, I have my own stories of that day too, but this isn't that story. Beyond that, you don't hear much about us, and you can't blame them, there's not much here. We're basically a washed up former Route 66 town. Anyway, moving on. This means we live in inland Southern California, which means I've grown up familiar with the state's trademark earthquakes and wildfires. In fact, a treat for us as kids when one of the latter was burning was to go to what was the old Norton Air Force Base, now officially San Bernardino International Airport. Everyone still just calls it Norton. I watched the firefighting aircraft fly in and out. We're close to the foothills of the mountains bordering the Inland Empire Valley that can light up relatively often, but not close enough for us to ever have to worry about evacuating, or at least, not usually. We figured because the actual wood and brushland ended so seemingly far away that it was pretty much impossible for anything burning up there to really threaten us. But the fire that ignited on October 25th, 2003 would prove us all wrong. It would come to be called the Old Fire, part of Southern California's firestorm of 2003. I was 15 years old, and I watched it start from our living room window. Thinking back on what this thing became and the destruction it would bring, it seems surreal that the first wisp of smoke was so weak that I initially couldn't tell if it was smoke at all or just some dirt on the window. I remember looking down for only a few seconds, literally just a few, and when I looked back up, it was already a sizable, distinct plume. Wow, that thing's fast, I remember thinking casually. That would become one mother of an understatement. It continued to grow at that alarming rate, going from pretty large to wow. And then as we drove out to pick up my sister from my friend's house that afternoon and really got a good look at it, to that feeling of, holy smokes, it slowly started creeping into our guts. As we watched the fire rush on in and devour a sizable structure on the hills, far too quickly for fire crews to even have a chance of saving it, we realized that this time, might be different. It was during the ride back up the 210 freeway that some of the more vivid memories cemented themselves into my head. The wind shifted and started blowing the smoke cloud over the valley. We had to go under and through it. The pollution was so strong we had to use wet tissues and put them over our faces, even over the face of our poor Aussie shepherd who was in the car with us. The cloud was so thick and dense that it really did block out the sun directly beneath it, and you could feel the temperature drop. Smoke clouds, of course, are made up of dry contents, so unlike regular clouds of water vapor, they don't let in as much of the sun's light or warmth to creep through. Eventually, it would be this wind shift that would cause some of the most horrific events of this blaze. At this point, we glued ourselves to the news when we got home, our demeanor going from the typical, mostly nonchalant, brush fires man, what can you do, to a strange, ominous sort of quiet as we waited to see just how bad this thing would get. At one point, some of the smoke cloud descended onto our neighborhood, turning the sunlight a downright, unsettling shade of deep red. I went outside to get a better look, and that wasn't a good idea, as I found out I couldn't even breathe. It was legitimately pass out if you stayed out for too long bad. I went back inside, noting that it somehow didn't smell like a normal wildfire, and I soon found out why. Turns out it had reached the foothill neighborhoods. It smelled different now because it wasn't just burning trees and grass. It was burning man-made materials. It was burning homes. The footage from those areas, some of it still viewable online, it's still so unreal to watch. House after house after house burned up like they were nothing, some stubborn to a fault residents trying completely in vain to combat the flames on their own, already gutted houses with mere garden hoses, apparently unable to accept a harsh reality that all was lost. Those streets really did look almost like a war zone. Now we started to realize the way the fire line was advancing and involuntary evacuation areas expanding even further, we were not as safe as we thought. Finally, our household did what it had never done before, or ever since. We packed our bags, gathered important documents, dusted off pet crates, and prepared to evacuate. That night we slept in shifts, blinds open on the front windows, constantly keeping watch on the orange light that now covered large portions of the mountains, waiting for any knock that might sound through the door, signaling it was time for us to leave. Thankfully, it never came. The exhausted fire crews, already stretched thin due to other large fires still burning in their region, and low on air power due to the largest, heaviest hitting aircraft types being grounded in the wake of 2 prominent crashes the year before, were finally able to extinguish the wing of the fire advancing down the foothills. We were officially out of the danger, but their job was certainly far from over. In the 8 days it took to finally contain it, the old fire, having split into 2 main fronts, continued to carve a path of destruction to the northeast into mountain communities such as Big Bear, Crestline, and Lake Arrowhead, and west through and past the Cajon Pass areas, eventually merging with the simultaneously burning Grand Prix fire. When all was said and done, The old fire was cemented as one of the worst fires in California's history. It consumed a total of 91,281 acres of land. It cost $42 million, destroyed well over 950 homes and structures, forced over 80,000 people to evacuate, and caused or contributed to 6 deaths, not due directly to the flames, but from heart attacks due to the resulting stress and fear. And that was only the immediate results of the fire itself. In the following months, the burn zone saw unusually heavy rainfall. The hillsides and mountain slopes, stripped of the vegetation that normally helped keep it in place, became unstable, and a rash of landslides resulted. One of these was the slide that ripped through a camp in Waterman Canyon, taking the lives of another 14 people on Christmas Day, and it was all, directly or in part, the result of arson, perpetrated by a single angry meth head named Ricky Lee Fowler when he tossed a road flare into the brush along the old Waterman Canyon Road. He sits on death row now as far as I know, charged with 5 counts of murder and 2 counts of arson. Needless to say, the fall and winter of 2003 in San Bernardino and nearby communities was a crazy time, interlaced with tragedy. Tales of immense loss abound. I will never forget the hollow, surreal feeling as we drove through some of the hardest hit neighborhoods, and we saw nearly entire streets of homes leveled and gutted. But I'll also remember some of the brighter spots. As many know, dire circumstances bring out both the worst and the best in people. We personally saw some of the latter as a result, in the form of tons of people, from relatives to less familiar acquaintances, causing our phone to ring off the hook as they took time out of their day to reach out to us, making sure we were okay, and to essentially let us know that we had their support and a place to go to if the worst should happen. But now we know. The couple of miles between us and those mountains is a considerable layer of protection from wildfires, but it's not impenetrable. If you do live in a similar proximity to such undeveloped lands, you don't need to be paranoid, but do be prepared. Here's something that happened quite some time ago. For some background context, I grew up in Arizona near the mountains. My property consisted of a small farm, with you being required to drive at least a mile to get to my land. Around me were a few other homes, but they were pretty far apart from me. Right behind my house, I had a huge field where my family members and I would sometimes play soccer, and right behind that field was a set of woods. For the most part, the woods were uninhabited. The only reason I would go out there is if I were to take my dog for a walk. I mainly chose to go walk in town due to the isolation out there, as it sometimes creeped me out. It seriously felt that whenever you went into those woods, you were in an entirely different world, and monsters were keeping an eye on you. Anyway, I did mention the road that you take to get to my house. At the very end was a barricade you had to open in order to drive or walk inside. It was those kinds that has a chain on it. You would have to take it off in order to open or close it. Towards the other side of the field was an old barn. It belonged to a neighbor that stored his tools as well as his farming equipment. With that background information out of the way, let me go ahead and tell you about what happened. So I just recently purchased this land about 2 months ago. Even though I always grew up as a hard worker, it didn't mean I had difficulty getting everything set up around me. Because of this, I would often have my cousin Sam stay around and help me take care of things. This was during the winter time, and for those who know, certain parts of Arizona get all 4 seasons. It had started to get cold, and I needed help taking care of the animals. This one afternoon, Sam wanted to go out into the woods to get some pictures for his portfolio. I'd always told him I felt pretty weird going into those woods, but with my cousin there, I thought why not? It should be fine. Along with me, I brought my German Shepherd Morty. We set off into the woods like normal. Sam wanted to go down a trail I'd never gone down before, and so that's where we started heading. Everything was going as planned. Sam was taking pictures of some of the nature, and Morty and I were following along. We did, however, start to notice a few odd things that even I started to question. At first, it sounded like footsteps, but then it went to the sounds of whispering. This had started to make Morty growl. Obviously, I kept telling Sam to stop since Morty was getting stressed out, but he told me he wasn't doing anything. I looked right at him as we both heard the sounds of something running away near us. We both froze as we listened in, but try as we did, we saw no one. All we saw was what looked to be like somebody running in the distance, at least their shadow. You can imagine, with all the trees, it was hard to see them. Now, Sam was able to convince us to stay a little bit longer since he wanted to take a few more pictures. I didn't want to stay, but one look at Morty and we just decided whatever. After another 15 minutes of walking, we stumble upon this open area. At the very end was what looked to be like an old abandoned cabin. Again, the feelings from earlier returned and Morty started to growl. Finally, Sam decides it was time for us to leave, so we start making the walk back home, but we're still getting the feeling of being watched. Finally, after making it to the end of the woods, we start walking back onto the field. I just so happened to look behind us while we were almost to my house, and that's when I saw something that I would never forget. It appeared to be a really tall person with long hair. I couldn't really make any details out other than that since it's pretty much nighttime at this point. I told Sam to turn around and he sees them as well. It's at this point we both take off running back into the house. While we were running, we both did end up hearing what sounded like a coyote or a wolf. That's really the best way I could describe it. Once inside the house, we made sure to lock all the doors and windows. I ended up calling my neighbors at this point and wanting to know if they were the ones out there. What they told me was surprising. None of them had been out there at that time of night. Actually, one of them had thought I was on their property the other evening because he saw someone trying to get inside his barn. When he went to go check it out, he then sees as they run towards my house. That was probably why he thought it was me. The reason why I would like some explanation for this story is because a few nights after, I'd been hearing noises outside the house. I even saw what looked to be like somebody stumbling around in the field. Sam was already back home at this point, and the only company I had was Morty. Morty would start whining anytime something like this would happen. I would always think it's because he needed to go outside to pee or something, but whenever I would open the door, he would just stand there with all the hairs on his back standing up. He would refuse to go outside. It was when I looked towards the field, I did see an individual. I've even had an officer friend of mine who came to check out the area along with somebody else, but so far nothing. That's what's worried me so much. The last thing that happened was finding all these strange tracks around my property. That was about a week ago, but since I haven't seen anyone, all I've noticed is Morty acting the same way. As an update to this story, I actually ended up finding out what was happening. It turned out that there was a man staking out homes because one of the neighbors had their house broken into, with somebody dressed up in similar attire to the person I'd seen on those previous evenings. So that did explain what had been happening. And the scariest part is the home intruder that ended up going in the house was not only armed, but they beat up the homeowner pretty badly. But luckily they did survive. It just sucks because they were an elderly couple, so they really didn't stand a chance. It's just crazy to think that had they broken into my home, I might have stood no chance. But then I think of Morty. He would have protected me. But again, that's in the past. So, I have a stalker. I'm a freshman, and for the first semester I was doing online school, but I didn't really socialize. So I became depressed, which then called my mom's attention, and she threw me back into normal school. I met a couple of people. I have about 5 friends, but they're not in this story. So okay, I was in my last class, which was social studies, and I get to leave class 2 minutes early because I sometimes miss the bus going home, and on those occasions my teacher would have to take me home. I walk out of the classroom, and then this guy came up to me and said, "Hey." Now he never told me his name. I turned and I was confused because I didn't really know anyone yet. So we're going to call him Mark. Mark was about 2 inches taller than me. Mark walked beside me. Like I said, I was confused because I never met this person in my life, and I didn't even know how he knew my name. Right off the bat, he asked how I was doing. I said, "Good, I guess." Before I could ask if I knew him, he said, "Are you in a relationship?" "No." "Okay. Are you looking for one?" "No, school comes first." "So?" "No, school comes first. Sorry." Now if I sound like I'm a jerk, I'm not. I'm just a loner, so I get tense. "Why not?" "Listen, I really gotta go. I can walk you to your locker." "No, it's fine." Mark walked me to my locker, and this repeated every single day. So anyway, I got sick one week and I got anxiety going back because I felt everybody was going to ask where I was, so all of my teachers knew not to ask. Again, he left when I left and he asked where I was, so my anxiety was building up. I mentioned I was sick. "That's no reason to stay home, sweetie." "Please don't call me that." "Sorry, baby. Is that better?" "No, now leave me alone. I'm not in the mood to talk." Ugh. He then turned around and he left. Now let me explain where I live. I live in an apartment and it's in a gated community with a pool playground and stuff like that. At night, the gates lock, so you need to put in a code or get a fob key. Otherwise, there's no other way of getting in. At around 9 p.m., I was home alone and suddenly there was a knock on the door. I figured it was my neighbor checking in because my mom wasn't home. But I always look through my peephole, and like you probably already guessed, it was Mark. I pretended not to be home, and I turned off all the lights and electronics and I stared at the door. A few moments later, I heard the door start to shake, and it's now I head into my mom's room, and I hide under the bed. Now, my mom's bed is the one that you can use a remote to make it go up and down. I raised it all the way up, and then I got in and took the remote, and I lowered it. I now heard the door jiggle frantically, and I started crying, but 5 seconds later, it stopped, and I now heard running. Yes, I should have called the cops, but by the time they got there and went through the gates, I would have been dead, or he would have been gone. So I fell asleep from all the crying. Then the next day, my mom was looking for me, and I was still under the bed, so I yelled, "I'm here," and I raised the bed. I told her what happened. She hugged me and she took me out for ice cream. Naturally, I didn't go to school for the next 3 days, and I was very scared to go back. I begged my mom, but of course she said you have to go back. I was really dreading to go to my favorite class, and I walked in and avoided eye contact, but I felt his eyes on me. By the time the class ended and it was time for me to leave, I was on the verge of crying, but I held it in. For the next few weeks, he wasn't showing up to class, and nobody knew where he was, so I felt better. However, I really was dreading the day he would come back. It's been a month, and he hasn't returned to school, but whenever I'm out with my friends, I do see him hiding in dark corners and following me. He usually stays about 20 yards away, and he waves creepily. Also, about a week ago, I was taking the bus to the mall to meet up with my friends, and I looked towards the end of the bus and saw him staring at me intensely. I usually sit in the back, but I stayed in the front this time. My stop was 5 stops away, so about 20 minutes. Every 4 to 5 minutes, he would move up a seat. I honestly couldn't take it anymore, so I was planning to press the stop button thingy, and when I did, I started to gather my belongings. But at this moment, I got a strong whiff of Axe cologne. I watched in horror as he got off and waited for me. I never did get off, and I haven't seen him since. This happened a couple of years ago and involves this story from the woods. At the time, I was 25 years old and living in a small apartment I had a roommate named Amy, but she was actually in the process of moving out of state. She got an amazing job opportunity working for a business, and I was so proud of her. Sadly, this would mean I probably wouldn't be seeing her for quite some time. I myself was working and didn't always have time off to do things. Anyway, by this point, Amy had been out for at least 3 months, and I was getting pretty lonely at the apartment. I ended up getting a little cat named Snowball to keep me company. So one day, I received a call from Amy saying that she was going to be having a party for her little brother. Her brother Alex and I always got along great, so I ended up talking to my boss to request some time off. On a Thursday afternoon, I head out with Snowball and we make the 5-hour trip to go visit Amy. Unfortunately, on my way there, my car started having issues. My tire was acting up, and this forced me to stop at the side of the road. This did also end up adding more hours to my already 5-hour planned trip. Who knew that this would just be the beginning, however, of the issues I would be soon facing. I called Amy and I told her I would have to meet up with her later the following afternoon while I had my car tire replaced. Don't worry, the party is until 2 more days, so you have plenty of time. Just make sure to update me on where you're at in the meantime. Our phone call consisted of. Fast forward a little. Me and Snowball make it into town and meet up with Amy. The day of the party arrives and we proceed to have a great time. After the day of the party, I proceeded to stay in town for a few more days, and this is when Amy told me about this cabin that her family owns out in the mountains. I was interested. Amy knew how much I love camping and going out into the woods. Amy also told me that she could take me there if I wanted to, but she couldn't stay there herself since she was busy with work. If anything, she would just tell me how to get there and I could go on my own with Snowball. When she told me about how lonely it gets out there and how she couldn't go, it should have been my warning sign that I should have just stayed back at her place. Still, my love for adventure in the woods got to me. With that, Snowball and I make an hour drive up into the mountains, where eventually we found this lonely little road. I was unsure on whether or not we were going the right way, but we do eventually see a small cabin up ahead of us. It was the only one we had seen out there, and it was very nice. It sat right along the woods with a little pond on the side of it. I still recall seeing the little birds that sat peacefully in the field next to it. Once I step outside and go up to the front door, I start taking in the feeling of just how quiet it is out here. Aside from the wildlife I heard, there wasn't really anything else that I heard out here. I open the door to the cabin and step inside, only to see how empty it was in there. Though there was some furniture here and there, it was pretty much as empty as a brand new house. Anyway, I let Snowball down as she made her way over to the couch, and then I put my backpack of items down on the couch next to her, and I proceeded to call Amy. Here's more or less how that conversation went. Hi Amy, just letting you know I made it to your family's cabin just fine. You didn't tell me how abandoned this place was. It looks brand new. Oh, that's right, I forgot to tell you. My dad was there just a couple of days ago. He took out some of the old furniture and he's in the process of replacing things. If you're hungry, make sure to check the refrigerator. You can take whatever you want. He may or may not show up, so in case you hear noise, it's most likely going to be him. After that, I tried to figure out where I would be sleeping for the night. The couch was fine, but it was too small for me to sleep on. So I head up these old spiral stairs to where I make it to this attic area. Here I find an old dirty mattress with some blankets and pillows. Not the greatest, but it will have to do, I guess. I made myself a sandwich, and after some time I head upstairs into the attic area where Snowball and I try to get some rest. I was really tired from a long day, and so I ended up falling asleep at around 10 p.m. Even though I was fast asleep, it didn't stop me from hearing what I heard next. I started hearing what sounded like someone trying to pry open the doorknob. This wasn't just your normal, let's just put the key in the door and open the door gently. No, it was more like this person was trying to break the doorknob, even sounding like they were kicking at the door at the same time. This woke us up and it freaked us out pretty badly, but I figured that this might have been her dad, so I looked through the little attic window to see if I saw any signs of a person or a vehicle. First thing I noticed was no car in the driveway. The only car I saw was mine. That was really weird. The noise continued on and off for a couple of minutes, almost as if there was some sort of pattern. I laid back down, only to hear the sound of a door closing downstairs and the kitchen chairs being moved around. As this is going on, I heard no talking whatsoever. Surely if Amy's dad was here, we would have heard him call out to us, but nothing. We both waited there in the attic, confused as to what we're both hearing. But what I heard next was even more confusing. I could hear someone talking outside the cabin. It was hard to make out what was said, but surely it was talking. It was now that I called my friend Amy to let her know what was going on. By now it's nearly midnight, so it did take her a while to answer. She did answer after the third call, and I ended up explaining everything to her. That's strange. My dad's actually spending the night over here. He ended up coming over here last minute. He's going to take Alex to the amusement park tomorrow. I'll tell you right now, whoever's there, that isn't my dad, Amy told me. I had no idea what to think of this moment, as I now froze in place. Now, I should have just stayed upstairs, but I chose to slowly make my way down there, having my cat stay upstairs just as a precaution. I was going as slowly as I could, keeping an eye out in every corner, making sure that nobody could jump out at me and attack me. Thank God no one ever did, but I did notice a few things. For starters, the back door was now open just a little bit, and I could feel the breeze of the night coming into the house. I looked around everywhere, but I found no one. I immediately now closed the door and double-checked to make sure everything was closed. And as I'm looking, I ended up seeing my cat Snowball as she ends up approaching me. Moments later, I ended up hearing a noise. I looked to my right, and to my surprise, there's a disheveled man in here, and worst of all, he's got a gun. My body goes cold, as now he raises the pistol up in my direction and told me to get out of here. At that point, it was enough for me. We both end up leaving the house and heading back into town, where I immediately got the police involved. They did end up going to the property, but unfortunately they never did catch that man with a gun. In the end, I never did find out more about it because I left shortly after. I don't really talk to Amy as much anymore, so I don't really know more information on whether or not they found him, since any time I've asked Amy, she's told me that she's known nothing of it. So to this day, this remains one of the scariest and one of the most unexplained experiences of my life. Not sure why, but for some reason, it feels like this just happened yesterday. So, me and my girlfriend were out camping in the woods where we ended up staying at her father's cabin. My girlfriend Ashley's dad normally rents out the cabin to people, but at the time nobody was staying there. It was actually the one that recommended us to go out there to check up on the place. He hasn't been out there in months since he's been so busy with his work. He told us if we could check up on the place, he would leave us the keys at home and we could stay there if we wanted to. And so the plan was set. We packed up the things we would need and we head out on a Saturday morning. On the drive out there, you can see just how isolated it was. The nearest house was at least 8 miles away from the cabin. Eventually, we arrived at said cabin at around 1 in the afternoon. Once there, we took out our things and we ended up relaxing for a little while. Ashley was going to go ahead and set some things up inside, and I was going to get started on the campsite in the meantime. I'll admit we love the comfort of being close to the cabin, but we also wanted to be able to camp outside. That's why we chose to set up a tent where we wanted to build ourselves a campfire next to, and we can just relax. If it did start raining or we needed to go inside the cabin, we did have that option available to us. So anyway, I start grabbing some of the things I'll be needing for our camp and start making my way down this little field. I follow a small little path for a few minutes until I arrive at this little clearing where we could easily set our things at. While I was out here, I began to get this very strange feeling. You know that feeling you get when you think you're being watched and you get this really anxious feeling about it? That's what I was feeling. So I looked up in the distance behind the tree line and I could make the outline of something out. I tried to ignore it as my imagination, but anytime I would look up, I would see movement. Finally, what really got to me was hearing branches breaking, then catching as somebody goes running the opposite way. Now, since I couldn't really see what it was, I just told myself it was most likely just some random animal and left it at that. After about half an hour of getting everything ready, I now start to make my way back to the cabin. I told Ashley about what happened, but we just both laughed it off, explaining it as my over-imagination. Unfortunately for me, all that hard work I put into building the campsite was going to be for nothing. Because guess what? It started to sprinkle, and then it started to rain pretty heavily. It was a bummer because the forecast did say there was going to be rain, but it was only like a 10% chance. I really didn't think it was going to rain that much. Oh well, I would just get everything in the morning. Left with not much else to do, we made some dinner at around 6 p.m. Then around 8 p.m. we make some hot chocolate and marshmallows, and we watch a movie on our laptop. Finally at around 10 p.m. we call it a night, and we each go to sleep. I want to say that around 2 in the morning I was awoken to this really loud noise. It sounded like a crashing sound. You can imagine my surprise hearing this. Besides, by this point the rain was pretty light and you could barely hear any sort of rain. So I woke up Ashley and explained what I had just heard. How she didn't hear the noise? I had no idea. I was jealous of her because somebody could be having a party with loud music outside and she could sleep right through it without any issues. Anyway, we both sat there and listened for a couple of more minutes as we tried to figure out what exactly we were hearing. All we were able to hear now was the light sound of rain against the window and the crickets outside. After a few more minutes, both Ashley and I got up and looked through the window. I did shine a light outside trying to see if I can find the source of the noise that wasn't the rain, but I didn't locate anything. So we now cautiously looked through each window before deciding that it must have just been a branch or something that fell on top of the roof. So anyway, fast forward now to 6 in the morning. By now we had done our best to forget about what happened the previous night as we prepared ourselves some coffee. Even though it was muddy outside, I wanted to go ahead and grab our things and put them inside. Ashley wanted to go along with me, and so she joined me as we made our walk over to that campsite. You can imagine that with all the mud, it was really hard to get around. What should have been a 5-minute walk to the spot turned out to be more like 15 minutes. Eventually, we can both see the tent I left outside, and as you can imagine, it's all wet and ruined from the rain. Thankfully, however, the rain hadn't washed it all away. At this point, the sun was just starting to light the woods and the surrounding area. Still, it was dark enough that you could see shadows and movement from animals, as well as ourselves. As Ashley and I are just about finished, we both heard movement in the trees just ahead of us. At this point, we both froze as we saw somebody step out from behind the trees. With the lighting in the woods, it was difficult to get many details, but I'll try my best to describe them to you. They seemed to be wearing some sort of mask, if that makes any sense. Also, this person was very tall and had long curly hair. You can just imagine our reaction to seeing them. We immediately stopped what we were doing and we start to make our way back to the cabin, exactly unsure of who was out there. Remember, the ground was muddy and it really didn't help that we had this going on now. This random person out here stalking us. We did look behind us as we're trying to get away from them, but now we don't see anything. That in itself was very eerie, but that would be an understatement to what we hear next. All of a sudden, we ended up hearing somebody yelling, almost like somebody was crying and screaming for help. That was then followed by 2 loud gunshots, and then the screams went silent. As you can imagine, Ashley and I were beyond horrified. Were the screams somebody that had been kidnapped? And was that person in the mask the one responsible for the gunshots and ending that person's screams? We're not sure, but what we did do was we got in our car and we ended up driving out of there, immediately going to the police station and telling them about what we had heard. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you more, but the cops haven't exactly told us anything, even all these years later. So, part of us, even though we're not exactly sure, we would like to hope that what we heard was just a couple of people messing around with us, with maybe one of them having a gun and the other person screaming and then stopping in order to scare us to make us believe that somebody had been killed. But I guess we'll never truly know, will we? Also, I guess I forgot to mention this before, but this took place in the Alabama wilderness. I was about 8 years old when this happened. I'll start by describing my neighborhood. I lived in the middle of a dead-end road, 2 homes away from a set of railroad tracks. My best friend lived across the street and 1 home closer to the tracks. We will call her Laura. My street being a dead-end road means the only people who came down it were those of us who lived there, mostly older people, the mailman, and even sometimes a few visitors we would have. It was the first night ever I was going to have a friend spend the night that wasn't a cousin or any of my mom's friends' kids. As you could guess, I was incredibly excited. I stayed at her house a few times before, but never had her over at my place at night. Laura lived with her grandparents, and on and off her mother would live there as well. I wanted her to come as early as was allowed, that way we could play longer, but I had some daily chores I needed to get done. Once I finished all the little tasks my mom had for me that day, I could barely hold in my excitement anymore, and my mom agreed to let me go to get Laura. Without hesitation, I said thank you and ran out the door and across the street. On my way over, I noticed a strange van parked in front of Laura's neighbor's house directly across the street from mine. It was what I would now describe as a creeper van. It was a dark burgundy color with only windows in the front, the type that would be made into an ice cream van. I slowed as I passed it to see if there was anybody inside. I had to walk behind it to get to Laura's house, so I couldn't see, but I could hear people arguing inside. When I made it to Laura's, her grandma was on the porch smoking a cigarette. She knew I was there to get Laura, so she just told me to head in. I helped Laura pick up a few things, such as clothes and a few things to play store with. A little game we made to get rid of things we didn't want anymore and let our friends have what they wanted. We anxiously ran back upstairs and out the door. Less than halfway down her walkway, across the front yard, we heard a woman say, "Towel. Towel, get me a towel." Laura and I both turned and we were paralyzed to see a woman with a shredded face staring back at us. Her nose was hanging from her upper lip. There were holes in her cheeks in which you could see bloody teeth, and one eyelid was badly scratched. She continued, "Towel, towel," with each word stepping closer. Laura's grandmother, who was still on the porch, threw a towel over her face. The moment we couldn't see her anymore, we booked it as fast as we could to my house. In a split second, we were locked in my room with the window shades cracked slightly so we could see what was going on. A few minutes go by and an ambulance and several police cars show up. They get a statement from Laura's grandmother and her mom. We found out a few days later that the woman was a drug dealer who was trying to make a deal with Laura's mom. When she refused, the woman tried to get her dog to attack, but in turn the dog attacked her instead. That was who I had heard arguing in the van just before seeing Laura. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that woman, but unfortunately, that dog did have to be put down because of what happened and because it was vicious towards the officers who arrived on scene. This ended up taking place near our small town in Wales, and it was about 3 years ago. At the time of this taking place, I was 19 years old. With me was my friend Walter, who was 23 at the time. Me and Walter were super close, and we're pretty much like brothers. We always did so many things together, and something we really liked to do was camping and exploring. It wasn't unheard of for us to grab our backpacks and go into the mountains at least every other weekend. We would always take the same trails that would start us off at the bottom of the mountain, and then we would end up circling back around. The only interesting thing we really saw or encountered out there were just a few animals here and there, but they would usually always run away. As for people, we would sometimes see people who stayed out there. We even had a few occasions where we had a run-in with friendly campers, and they would invite us to join them for food. Anyway, with that, you can imagine we have a lot of experience out in the wilderness. So anyway, one weekend, me and Walter met up to do our same camping adventure and walk like normal. The only thing was I wasn't really feeling like going the same way. I'd grown bored of going the same trail, and I'm pretty sure Walter was feeling the same, as he ended up agreeing. Instead, we decided to take this opportunity to go to a different part of the mountains that we'd never been to before. This way, we could also challenge ourselves and experience something further different. So we ended up spending half the day out in this part of the woods, taking the time to learn the land. Walter was ahead of me at the time, and I was busy tying my shoes. Walter soon calls out to me as I could no longer see him. I was unsure of what he wanted, and so I got up and started making my way to this small opening. Here we find what looks to be like an old abandoned house from ages ago. The doors were missing and the windows were broken too. It was very eerie and strange finding this home out here in the middle of nowhere, but we were pretty curious about it. Walter has always been into urban exploring, so he was the one that went in first. I walked inside with him seconds later, and I'll tell you, this place definitely had seen its better days. Inside, along with that broken glass in the windows I mentioned, we also saw and found some old furniture. We continued into one of the other rooms to find a bunch of strange drawings and writing on the wall. It was hard to see due to the lighting, but it was definitely strange when it's revealed to us that we see a bunch of pentagrams. But that wasn't the part that made us uncomfortable. You see, all of a sudden, we start to get this strange feeling, like we're being watched. "Hey, look, 2 kids," we ended up hearing. From out of the corner of my eye, we saw movement, and like something out of a nightmare, we see 2 large beat-up old men in about their mid to late 50s suddenly pop out. One is carrying a shotgun, and the other has a large butcher knife. To add on top of it, it appears that they have dried up bloodstains on their clothes too. Yes, you two will do just fine, won't you? You want to talk about the scariest thing in the world? Here it was, face to face with 2 armed men in one of the most bizarre and unexplained encounters of our life. What were they doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And why did they have blood on their clothes? We didn't even want to question it, since as they started to approach us, Walter and I booked it out of there, only to look back and see the 2 men stopping just a short distance from the tree line we had entered from. That was pretty much all there was to our experience. I apologize for it being somewhat anticlimactic, but that really was it, apart from not telling anyone. Looking back, we do wish we would have notified the police, but for some stupid reason we never did. Some friends have told us that they might have just been messing with us, or also could have been there hunting, but who really knows, to be honest. It still remains unexplained, and it's one of the freakiest things I've ever had to experience firsthand. This happened at my current workplace. I'm a 34-year-old man, and I work for an accounting firm in Tampa, Florida. In general, I'm an outgoing, friendly, and pretty laid-back individual. Just for context, at our office we have a service that comes nightly to clean bathrooms, do some light cleaning in the office, empty garbage, etc. The building I work in houses about 4 companies across 3 floors, and this janitorial service works for all of them. There are several workers in our building, by the way. Now, I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I can speak enough to have a conversation with someone. Most of these ladies are very nice, and I enjoy talking with them when they come to our office or if I see them in the common areas. However, one lady, I'll call her Patricia, creeps me out. Patricia is a slender woman, about my age, and she's a heavy smoker. The first time Patricia saw me, she said, "Que guapo," how handsome, and proceeded to go in for a kiss on the lips, but I turned and gave her my cheek. I'm used to being hugged, but that made me a bit uncomfortable. Patricia didn't intimidate me physically, and for a while she would just come up and talk to me and maybe kiss me on the cheek. She would ask me about where I lived, if I was married, and wanted to know all about me. I did tell her I wasn't married, but I lied about where I lived and generally tried to avoid her when possible, or I pretended to be on the phone whenever she came around. One night, however, she came into my office, kissed me on the cheek, and started stroking my face. She then said, "Que guapo," and stated in Spanish that we could make a lot of money if I agreed to marry one of her friends from Cuba and help her friends get pregnant because, as she stated, American children are worth a lot of money. She then pressed me against a wall and said, "Many beautiful children," in Spanish, while putting her hands all over me. This was when I decided to nope right out of that situation. I pushed her aside, and I left work right there and then. The next day, I told one of my partners about what happened the night before, and he let the company know that Patricia wasn't welcome in our office and told them about what happened. For the next 5 weeks or so, she gave me the death stare. Then one night, as I was working late again, she came into the office and asked if I could take her home because she missed her bus. I told her that I would not be able to take her home, and I suggested she contacted a taxi or maybe even Uber. She kept insisting, and I finally demanded that she leave the office, and I escorted her to the exit. Now, my office has a window that looks out into the right side of the parking lot where I park my car. I was coming back to my office from having thrown Patricia out, and I noticed that there was a van parked right across from my car. I then saw Patricia go over to the van and talk to the driver, and the driver and another guy got out of the van and were now heading into the building. I don't know what was going on, but my gut instinct said something was very wrong. I went to another part of our office that's separated from the main office by 2 sets of locked doors that the janitors don't have a key for. It's essentially a file room and server room, but it does have a couple of empty offices and an exit. I called a friend of mine, Mike, who also happens to be a deputy sheriff. I told him about the situation and asked him if he would escort me to my car. He agreed and told me to get somewhere safe until he got there. Mike got there maybe 10 to 15 minutes later, and when he got there, he said he saw a van driving towards one of the other buildings. Mike made sure I got to my car, and the next day I told the partner about what happened the evening before, and we decided that I would not work alone at nights anymore. He also called the janitorial service and demanded that Patricia be removed from our building and not allowed back. I thankfully have not seen her since. I know the police don't often get enough kudos, but kudos to my friend for helping me out of a very scary and surreal situation. Let me just go ahead and start off my story by saying in the end, we don't know exactly who it was we saw. I could spend hours trying to figure out what had happened, but then I realized maybe some of you could help me out. Alright, here it goes. Like any other bored young adult, growing up in a small town doesn't really offer you much to do. Don't get me wrong, it was nice living in a small town in Arizona where it's quiet for the most part, but as you might imagine, it becomes very routine. The same schedule of waking up, going to work, and coming back home was something I was starting to get frustrated with. Gone were my days of college, studying for exams and going out with friends on the weekends. Now were the days of making sure to go to work on time and having to interact with my fellow co-workers, who were very boring. Well, not all of them. My new job I was working at was a small quiet office where we handled paperwork and such. This meant very long hours of writing and critical thinking. The good thing was, as the weeks went by, I had gotten to know my co-workers some more. Lauren was one of my co-workers I got along with very well. We had similar interests in movies, TV shows, and music. Something else we shared was an excitement for the great outdoors. Lauren told me that in high school and college she was on the track and field team and spent many of her days running in the woods and on trails. This sounded awesome since most of my other friends weren't really into that. I myself loved running, so it was nice to have a friend who liked to do the same thing as me. With my new friend Lauren, we decided on going on a camping trip with our little dachshund. We ended up going into this nearby state park that offered campers the opportunity to camp nearby other families. There was also a fairgrounds of sorts, where the park offered cabins for people to stay in. It was great for families with small children because there was even a lake nearby where they could go swimming. That sounded great if we were like 12 years old, but for us, we wanted to take the opportunity to go further into the woods, something that looking back, we both ended up regretting. Instead of taking the normal exit that would take us to the fairgrounds, we ended up going out about another hour down the highway. Our GPS showed a road that went off into the mountains that was supposed to be another part of the park. This area, as you might imagine, was a lot more isolated and saw less foot traffic. I myself had never been here before, but Lauren said that she had been here when she was younger. She told me that she went camping out here with some cousins, although she did tell me it gets lonely up here and the phone signal is spotty at best. It offered you, however, complete isolation from people. So we exit our vehicle and we begin walking until we find a good spot to stop at. By this point in the daytime, the sun was just beginning to set over the mountainside, and the evening was just upon us. I don't remember how long after the sun went down that I started to feel strange, but I knew it wasn't long after. It was strangely quiet out here, with the only sound coming from the light mountain breeze that you would feel on occasions. I could tell that Lauren looked a little bit nervous too, but we both just blamed this on the cold air and the isolation. It was sometime after we had started eating that Lauren's dog started whining. This was then soon followed after by growling and barking. Both of us found it a bit strange and we began to worry at this point. But perhaps she had seen a squirrel or maybe some other sort of wild animal. I should explain something about her dog. She was very calm, something that Lauren kept telling me. Lauren said that she had never seen her dog act this way before, so for her it was something completely brand new. We tried to get her dog to calm down, but she just wouldn't. It was now Lauren told me that she saw what looked to be like movement farther up ahead of us. I was trying to act brave, but as soon as she told me that, I got nervous myself. I told her that it might be better that we just leave and head back to the car, and we didn't second guess that decision. We quickly put out the fire and grabbed our belongings. It's now when we're almost at the car that we ended up hearing the sounds of people talking. I looked towards Lauren thinking that perhaps she had said something since I wasn't looking at her, but she said nothing. She also thought that I had said something. What follows in the next minute was something that we couldn't explain. We both clearly can hear what sounds like laughter. This wasn't your normal laughter, like something of a funny joke. This was the sort of laughter you would hear in typical horror movies. Being out here on our own definitely didn't help. Quickly, we each jump into the car, one by one, until we're face to face with a group of lights heading towards us. We don't spend another second there as we're now driving away. We both did end up looking in the rearview mirror, and we see what looks like a group of people holding old-fashioned lanterns and wearing dark clothing and carrying pitchforks with pointy hoodies over their heads. Kind of think of like Klansmen, but instead of the white robes and the white pointy hoodies over their heads, they were black robes and black hoodies. That was the final image that we were left with. I'm not exactly sure who those people were or why they were out there, but we do kind of think that this might have been some sort of strange cult that we ended up stumbling into. Either way, it may have been overreacting, but you just never know, especially when you're out there in the middle of nowhere, miles away from civilization. My two younger brothers, my dad and I, have a favorite spot to camp in the bush of Australia. We've camped there many times before, and we would love to go fishing together and enjoy the fire at night. Although there was one thing I hated most about our camping spot. The toilet blocks were a bit of a walk away. and at night they would be terrifying to walk to as the road I would walk down was surrounded by the woods. It was thick with trees, and I could barely go into the woods even with my torch. This story actually takes place quite a few years ago. My younger brothers and my friend were joining me on this camping trip. We enjoyed the day laughing and swimming in the lake, but when the late afternoon came about, I realized something quite embarrassing. It was my time of the month. My dad had plans to go into town that day to do some shopping for us. I was too embarrassed to tell my dad this, so my friend allowed me to say she was the one who was on her period. So my dad bought some sanitary pads when he went into town. This piece of information holds meaning because normally, as the toilet block was so far away, I would just find a clearing in the woods to pee, but as I now needed to take care of extra things, I needed to actually go to the toilet block. Late at night, I needed to go and change, but I was too scared to go alone. My friend and one of my brothers, the brother of which is much skinnier than the other, ended up coming along with me. Now, as I was very paranoid, I made sure to take a pocket knife with me to the toilets, and I hid it in the pocket of my jacket. We walked along the dark road, our torch illuminating small amounts of the path ahead of us. After a long walk, we finally made it to the toilet block. These toilets were a building that stood by itself, not close to any other campsite, and not attached to any other building. We all entered the female toilets as my little brother didn't want to be alone in the dark as we had only one torch. Myself being the person I am, I took the torch from my friend and quickly checked the stalls to check if they were empty. They were. I then gave the torch back to my friend to take charge of it. We did our business and we washed our hands and we waited until we were all done in the toilet. As we exited, I was closest to the end of the building. I suddenly got a very eerie feeling. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid, but I made sure ever so slightly to look to the side. That was when I saw a short man. It was most definitely a man. I tried to remain calm as it seemed he just stood there and watched us start to walk away back to the campsite. Not only was I terrified for the fact that we were so young, I was also so scared for the fact that I was quite short and not very built in any way. My brother, as said before, is very skinny, and while my friend was taller, she didn't deal well with confronting situations, so we would find it very difficult to fight off anyone, and if this man had a weapon or knew how to fight, my pocket knife wouldn't be much of use. As I was the oldest in the situation, I felt a sense of responsibility to react correctly. I quickly walked faster. Naturally, my friend and brother followed suit. I could then hear footsteps behind us. My friend and brother had yet not noticed as they were talking and were not paying attention. When I was sure the man wasn't very close to us, I turned to them slightly and whispered, "Don't turn around and don't panic, but there is somebody following us." Normally, they would think I was joking and they would turn around jokingly and act afraid, but I guess there was something in my voice that indicated that I wasn't joking at all. I'm still proud of how calmly they acted as they seemed to naturally stop having a conversation so we could hear the man behind us. He's still behind us, slowly and steadily following us. After a couple of minutes of walking in the tense dark air, I take my brother's hand and start walking a bit faster, my friend doing so too. The man behind us walks faster. We continue like this for a while. We walk faster, and so does he. I put my other hand into the pocket that has the knife, and I get ready for anything, whether it'll help or not. The man quickens his pace even more, and I start to panic, heart racing and all. Without thinking, I start running, dragging my little brother along with me, my friend in tow. My friend and I both hated running, but we didn't care and didn't stop. This was the fastest any of us ever ran. The man continued to run behind us. We could hear his footsteps now heavily hitting the ground. He didn't seem to catch up very much before we could see the fire with my father and my other brother laughing around it. We continue running towards there, and finally we reach back to our spot. I quickly looked behind us, but there was nobody. I have no idea how close to us he had actually gotten, since by a certain point I stopped paying so much attention and I concentrated on running. I have no idea when he finally stopped following us, and I have no idea if he continued to watch us, or what his intentions were. Now I know this story seems kind of typical and anticlimactic, but when you're in this situation yourself, especially out in the middle of nowhere and at a young age, you'll understand the fear I experienced. I still don't understand how I was able to remain so calm and I didn't instantly scream. I remember I told my dad about what happened right afterwards, but he was very drunk by this point and laughed, thinking we were just playing around. I'm glad though that the man got scared. The state my dad was in, he wouldn't have been much of help. My friend and I found it difficult to fall asleep that night as we lay in the tent whilst my brothers and dad slept in the caravan. That was, thankfully, all that had happened. Edit. I have something to add. I was thinking back on this incident and I remembered something that happened the day beforehand. So, myself and my friend were at the camping spot just hanging around when a police officer drove up to us and was just asking my dad how everything was going and if there were any concerns. He said that everything was fine, since at the time, everything was. We thought it was strange for police to come around at camping grounds, but we didn't worry too much. Later that day, we went for a walk, whilst the sun was out, and passed another bunch of people that were camping and happened to be talking to the same police. They were making their rounds, which we thought was really weird because normally rangers of the camping grounds would do that to make sure the campers were behaving, not police officers. Now thinking about it, it makes me wonder if the police were maybe keeping a lookout for some creepy guy in the area. Not sure, but it is a possibility. This happened about a year ago, but ultimately it's what made me decide to move. Whether it be me overreacting or it's something else, I guess all of you can decide on that. So I remember this was in the winter time, and I was living in my small hometown in North Carolina. I lived about 20 minutes by bicycle outside of the small town, and for the most part, I really enjoyed it out here. The nights were quiet, but being surrounded by the mountains and woods wasn't really such a bad thing. At least not yet. The closest neighbors were a few miles away from me. So anyway, when this took place, I was working at a small grocery store. I was in charge of making the bread and other sweets as well. Basically the bakery job. Now, it's not really important to my story, but I just thought I'd give you some background context. What is important to this story is that I had no car. It was either I had to walk to work or I had to take my bicycle. Now, that was fine and all, until somebody ended up running over my bicycle. Thankfully not me, but this meant I had to save some money up to buy a new one, and it also meant I had to end up walking to work. This was about 40 minutes of walking, and it ended up going through those woods I mentioned. There was a small trail that you could take that either took you further into the mountains or directly into town, where I would normally go to. There would even oftentimes be where you'd run into people, so it never really felt like you were truly alone out there. One thing I always loved seeing was this small abandoned barn and windmill that was out there in the woods. As far as I knew, the original owner had passed away, and as far as I knew, he had no family, so it pretty much just stayed there abandoned. However, there were no trespassing signs everywhere, and I would soon find out exactly why it said no trespassing and private property, but this would be found out for all the wrong reasons. Anyway, with that information out of the way, I remember one night I had to stay and work double time because one of my co-workers ended up getting sick. It was a lot more work, sure, but at least I got double pay, so that was a good thing. Because of me picking up more hours, I wouldn't be done until later that night. Normally I worked from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., but with the added hours I would be working until 9. By the time I closed the store and cleaned up everything, it was close to about 9:30 p.m. One of my co-workers did offer to drive me back home, and I really should have taken the offer, but I told him I was fine since I did enjoy the walk home. Now, the only light I had with me was from my cell phone, and so I was using that along with the street lamps to make my way around. The trail did have some lights itself, but they didn't really offer you the chance to see too far ahead of you. Nonetheless, I figured since I've walked down this trail plenty of times before, I would be alright. That's what I ended up doing. The walk home on the trail was fine, and I hadn't seen anyone. When I ended up reaching the back roads of where the barn and windmill were, that's where I saw it. I wanted to see what this barn was truly all about, and so I ended up making my way over there, avoiding all the signs that said no trespassing, the ones I talked about earlier. Now, it was a bit creepy, but it was cool at the same time, so I ended up taking a couple of photos. After doing so, I start to make my way out. Now, the first thing I noticed when I left was the feeling of somebody being out there with me and just watching from a distance. I got the chills as I looked around expecting to see someone, but nothing. Soon, I start hearing the sounds of running, followed by a light that ended up shining. That sent me running down the trail as I'm too nervous to look behind me. With all the courage, however, I did look eventually, and I only see what looks like a hooded figure running off into the woods. Now, I couldn't explain what it was about, but it was about to get even more scarier. 20 or so minutes after I had arrived back home, I noticed my light on the front porch turn on. Normally, if someone is walking around outside, it automatically turns on. I carefully looked out the window across the field, and that's where I see the same hooded figure from the woods. I now go to close the curtains, and as I do, something tells me to turn around. I didn't want to, and so I proceed to go back to the couch. After another 5 or so minutes, now with my shotgun in hand, I heard the sound of scratching on the windows and doors. Now I was really confused. I immediately called the neighbors that lived a few miles away from me, and I wanted to know if they were outside on my property. Not only did they tell me it wasn't them, but they told me that they weren't even in town, as they were visiting some family a couple of cities over. Well, there went that possible explanation. I continued to sit there with my shotgun for what seemed like forever. Eventually the noises did settle down. Out of nowhere, however, I can see that the front porch light had suddenly turned on again. Curiosity gets to me as I go back to the window to look. It's here. I see that same hooded figure stumbling around my property. I had enough at this point. Using my shotgun, I point outside and I fire a warning shot. This sends this person running off into the woods, but by now my adrenaline is pumping through my veins at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But I do end up calling the police, who arrived at my house 15 minutes later and do an immediate scan of the property and the nearby woods. Nothing. No person in a hoodie. The only thing they did find was that they had found muddy footprints that led to and from my house, as well as tire tracks in the woods. I surely hadn't caused those. Needless to say, I never did see that unexplained individual again, and I do wonder to this day who they were, and if it weren't for the shotgun, would they have tried breaking in? Well, I don't really know. I'd like to point out that this story is true, and in our country, stuff like this happens a lot. I'm 13 years old now, and my brother is now 12 years old, and this happened when I was 9, and my brother was 8. One day, our father told us to go to the grocery store to get some milk, eggs, and flour. You see, we were making a cake that day for our grandfather. As we were going on our bicycles toward this store, we saw this weird, creepy dude that was just looking at us while we were riding our bicycles. My brother has always been scared of being kidnapped, but not me. But for some reason, I was actually getting weirded out by this dude. Once we arrived at the store, we parked our bicycles and we saw the man again just looking at us. Now I'm actually creeped out. We went inside, but the man didn't come in. We knew now something was odd, so we told the security guard about it, and he said that it might be nothing, but he also said that it happens sometimes. That's sort of strange. So we bought our stuff that we needed for the cake. We walked out of the store, but this time the man came to us and said, "Hey kids, Want some candy?" I was like, "For real? Free candy?" But I wasn't thinking to not take stuff from strangers. We said yes eventually, and then he said, "Follow me." This time I knew this would be a trap, but I actually tried to act like I would fall for it. But when I looked at my brother, he knew I was acting. We both followed them for about 10 seconds, and then I said, "Book it." We had our bicycles that day, and we drove as fast as we could with hearts pounding from the other side to the other. I was so scared that I started shaking, but my brother already had tears in his eyes. But our home wasn't that far, only a couple of blocks away. Once I saw my house, I had butterflies in my stomach, but I was so happy. We rushed in and told our father about the situation. He was actually freaking out and he called the cops. The cops asked us if we saw his face, but unfortunately, we never did. The cops did tell us that they would search the area for the man, but as of today, he has never been found. Okay, so this happened about 5 years ago. I was living at home with my mom and dad in a small house right outside Seward, Alaska. I'm currently 18 years old and I'm studying in Montana, but when this took place, I was 13. Now, Seward is very small. It's got a very small population, in fact. It's also pretty neat because you pretty much know everybody that lives there. Now, with it being winter at the time this happened, you rarely saw anybody out on the streets. Now, at the time, we only had about 4 hours of sunlight, and even then you rarely saw anyone. I would also like to add that even though we technically lived in this small town, our house was up in the nearby woods, further away, just like I mentioned. Now, I remember this one night in particular. My mom and dad had left the house because they had to go take care of some family that were about an hour away. This left me at home to look after our new little puppy, Max. Max was seriously like my best friend, and we always watched TV together. I didn't really feel like going, so that's why I told my parents I'd just stay at home with them. So fast forward to about 9 p.m. and the movie we were watching was about to end. I was getting pretty tired myself, and so I fell asleep halfway through the credits. I was instantly awoken, however, by Max starting to whine. I did think this was weird, so I thought perhaps he just needed to go outside or something. Now, normally, before I would take Max outside, I would always look out the window. I don't know why, but it was just a strange habit of mine. In front of the window, we had a large tree that covered some of the view. Still, even with that, you could see some of the field and woods. Now, as soon as I walked up to the window, I stood there frozen as I could see somebody in a ski mask staring right back at me, and they're holding a gun. I had no idea what to think, as I now saw them turn around and walk off into the dark of the night. Looking back, I was pretty sure that was the reason Max was making noise. Now, if you thought that was bad, a few seconds later I started to hear the sound of the back door trying to be opened. I now looked at the doorknob from the hallway, and I see that in fact, it is moving. Whoever was out there was obviously trying to get inside and burglarize the place. Immediately, I got on the phone to call the police. They told me that they would have officers out to the area, but in the meantime, I was to remain locked in place. Not that the lady on the phone had to tell me twice to do. When the officers did arrive, they had looked everywhere, but they had seen nothing. No masked man with a gun anywhere. Bear in mind, as I was on the phone, things had gone silent. Now, the only thing that was found was that one of the screens on the windows had been slashed. Cops did end up staying around with me until my parents got back, and they ended up explaining everything to them. Nothing similar like that has ever happened to me again, nor did it happen to anybody else in our town. As a side note, I remember it was about 5 degrees that night, and again we were out in the woods. If it was somebody from the nearby town, then I'm not sure who it could have been, since everybody there is pretty friendly. Besides, why would they be out there in such cold weather? I don't really know, but something about being home alone and experiencing that is what really gets to me, even now as I write this out to all of you. I'm a 16-year-old male. Just a little background about me to better understand this story. I'm 6'2", 230 pounds. Nothing really scared me until this day a few weeks ago. It was a Friday night, roughly 8 o'clock at night. I was with 5 friends, myself, my 2 best friends, and 3 other girls. My mother told me I could use her Toyota Tacoma that night to go to a party. I've lived in Arizona my whole life, so I know the roads really well, and the party was just outside Casa Grande, some little town called Maricopa. The party was in the middle of the desert, and we get there and have a good time. All of my friends were wasted that night, as they didn't have to drive. I myself admittedly had a little bit to drink and smoked a few bowls, but it's not my first rodeo, so I could handle driving in my condition. On our way home, we have to go down about a 50-mile stretch of road that was dead, with the occasional house on the side of the road that was going maybe 90 miles an hour. The girl I was with in the front pointed out something in the middle of the road, so I slowed to a stop, and this was when a woman emerged from a car in the middle of the road. She walked over to the truck just a little. For your information, a few days before this, I put a couple of light bars on the truck so I could see in dark places because the headlights didn't do too much. I had the light bars on and I could tell they were blinding the woman, so I turned them off, and I know that this was a dumb decision now that I look back on it. She came to the window and asked if I could help her put a spark plug in because she said she didn't know how to do it. Alarm bells pop up in me, but being me, I said, "Yes, ma'am, I can do that." So I did it, and then I noticed that car had been intentionally disabled. This discovery shocked me, but not as shocking as what was about to happen next. Now, another detail to add is that my mother keeps a handgun inside the glove compartment, which was currently in there. Anyway, I turned around because I ended up hearing yelling from the truck, and this is when I see a man reaching into the window towards my girlfriend. I immediately run over to the driver's seat and I pull out the gun and point it at the man. He was small, maybe about 5'2", and as this is happening, I hear footsteps in the dirt on the side of the road. I hopped into the truck, turned on the light bars, and what I saw was shocking. 9 to 10 people standing in the road, and it's now my heart sank. I told everybody in the truck to hang on, and I busted a 90-degree angle, turned into the desert, and before I could get onto the dirt, I ended up hearing a gunshot that echoed through the night. I gunned it and never looked back, and to this day I have no idea what their intentions were, but I'm sure they weren't good. Some advice to all of you listening: be careful on empty roads. So let's get started with a couple of things. Growing up in Australia, I lived in a home where a lot of strange things would happen. It was just me, my mom, my dad, and our cat. The thing is, we started noticing things going missing, or we would hear the sounds of footsteps and knocking at time. For a while, you can imagine we did everything we could to explain it all. We would set up cameras, we would listen, but we never did come up with anything. It seemed like I was the one that was mainly experiencing this. It bothered me at first, but I eventually got used to it. We did eventually move out, and things seemed to have settled down after that. The only reason I'm bringing up these details is because I've always had this fascination with unexplained happenings. This is what made me very confused with what happened. Alright, so with all that, I'll go ahead and fast forward to my college years. By this point in my life, I'd already put everything that had happened in my old home behind me. Now, my main focus was studying and trying to earn my degree. Still, even with all that going on, it didn't stop me from doing something that I enjoyed. That's camping. Thankfully for me, I had met a bunch of college friends who loved the great outdoors and enjoyed spending time out in the outback. One weekend, I had been pretty stressed out. And the thing is, I really didn't do too well on a test I'd taken the other day, and I wanted to go out and do something. Normally, I could have just gone into town, but that sounded too boring. Instead, I met up with my roommate friends and wanted to know if they wanted to go camping this weekend. We had Monday off, so we figured why not get our minds off of school for a little while and go out. So along with my friends, Mark and Kimberly, we made a 2-hour drive out into the middle of nowhere. It was an area perfect for campers, so we figured it was perfect for us as well. When we had arrived, we had seen no one, which was great. We were looking forward to being the only ones out there. That area was essentially like any other you would imagine. Miles of nothingness and rock formations were what mainly consisted of this land. In the distance, you could see some mountains with beautiful fields in between. Moving on. As soon as we arrived, we ended up parking our car into a small parking area. Here all we saw were empty parking spots. Once we grabbed our backpacks and belongings, we started our little backpacking adventure. It had rained just a few days ago, so the ground was still a little bit muddy. But even with that, it wasn't stopping us from our getaway. While walking around, I kept having this really strange feeling. My friends were acting alright, but I kept feeling as if I saw shadows, or I heard noises. I would tell my friends about it, but all they said was that I was just hearing things. Now, because of me being so nervous, I offered to stay up during the nighttime and keep an eye on the campfire. For the most part, nothing really happened on night number 1. I would sometimes hear movement in the nearby trees, but whenever I looked around, I hadn't seen anything. Blaming this on my overreactive mind, I put it to the side and eventually settled into the tent to get some sleep. While trying to sleep though, I kept getting cold and waking up. Now this tent was the ones you would use if you were in the mountains. It normally shouldn't get cold inside, and I even had plenty of blankets as well. Since the ground was mainly dirt and still sorta muddy, I blamed it on that. Night number 2 was a different story. That's when things really started to escalate, and it got weird. We once again spent the day exploring and walking about until around 5 in the afternoon. Once we were tired, we made our way back to our campsite, where we set up dinner. Kimberly was actually the one that pointed this out to us, but we had noticed a trail of tracks that were walking up to our campsite. They looked different from ours. It looked to belong to some sort of wild animal. So cautiously, we walked back to our campsite, but we found nothing. The only difference now was it seemed like somebody had gone through our things, but thankfully they hadn't taken anything. That did make us a bit more alert that night, however. After all, we were out here in the wilderness, but it's not a surprise if there might be some sort of animal. So after a nice warm meal, Mark goes inside his tent, which leaves myself and Kimberly outside by the campfire. We talked for about an hour or so, talking about everything we had seen. And me and Kimberly go through the camera that we had brought with us, as we take a look back at all the wonderful pictures we had taken. While doing so, Kimberly and I ended up hearing movement in the nearby trees. This made both of us nervous as we listened in. After all, we're already paranoid from seeing the footprints. Eventually, we just tell ourselves it's most likely just some small wildlife or something and calm down. About an hour later, it's 10 p.m. and we both decided to go inside the tent to get some rest. Once again, while trying to get some sleep, I woke up due to how cold it was. Again, I just couldn't explain that feeling of something in the woods. Only this time, I felt somebody was behind our tent. We had our lantern off, and I could see that Mark's lantern was off as well. You were actually able to see the glow through the tent as someone had their light on. This meant that Mark was asleep and hadn't been the one walking out there. Kimberly was asleep, but I whispered to her to try and wake her up. It took about a minute, but she eventually woke up, pretty tired and confused too. "What's wrong? Aren't you able to sleep?" "That's part of it, but haven't you been hearing the noise around the tent?" "No, I was asleep. It's probably just that same animal we heard. Go back to sleep, it's nothing." I think Kimberly was doing her best to calm me down, but I could tell that she had a concerned look on her face. Suddenly she stopped talking and she listened in with me, as we now both hear the sound of somebody pacing around our tents. I'll tell you one thing, this didn't sound like any small animal. It sounded larger than that, more so, like a human being. Against all logic and getting all my courage, I looked through a small little opening in the front of the tent. If this was Mark walking around or something, that would finally settle our nerves. This way we could have explained it. I looked through the small opening, however, but noticed Mark's tent was closed. Also, his lantern was off, indicating he was sleeping. It was now that Kimberly grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back. She looked really scared, and I instantly saw why. We both clearly can see a shadow through the tent. With the moonlight being so bright, it cast this shadow against our tent. At this point, I had enough. I wanted to just go out there and chase whoever was doing this away. But I don't recommend anyone doing that, since you don't know who they might be and if they might have a gun. Although to be fair, we were already screwed to begin with since we're out here in the middle of nowhere. I opened the tent regardless and heard running and the sound of crashing in the woods. Once that happened, everything just went quiet. All the noise we had heard, the footsteps, the animal sounds, were gone like that. This all happened in a matter of seconds, mind you, so I wasn't able to get a look at whoever was out there. Mark ended up stepping out of his tent with a worried look on his face. He now saw as me and Kimberly were outside the tent with this look of confusion. Mark proceeded to tell us both that he had heard noises over the past 10 minutes and thought that we were the ones making the noise. We now had confirmation that neither of us were the ones responsible for the noise. Now, you can begin to imagine just how we were feeling in that moment. Now, unfortunately for us, we were out in the middle of nowhere. Walking a minimum of 5 miles in the dark with something strange out there wasn't something we really wanted to deal with. Instead, we take our chances and we go back inside our tents. Nothing more happened that night and we were all able to get some rest. We were planning on leaving this morning, but we had some breakfast before heading out. While having breakfast, we kept trying to explain what had happened. Was it a wild animal? Was it a human being? Well, we're not sure. Some random person walking around at night definitely seemed like a possibility, but again, we're not too sure. Also, there is another thing to mention. We had seen no other cars or signs of people out there. Remember how we mentioned that? Well, we couldn't come up with an explanation as we now packed everything and headed back to our car. Of course, this wouldn't be a proper ending without our car having issues. One thing were a couple of scratch marks we found on the back window, including that one of the tires was completely slashed. So, not sure if some wild animal out there was pretty pissed off at us for being out there. But I mean, what other explanation was there? Was there some random person out there just trying to cause problems? Not sure, but we haven't been camping since that night. Because, can you really blame us? We have this fear that we're going to bump into some crazy maniac out there who might end up murdering us in cold blood. So my story is from 7 years ago, when my friends and I were teenagers. We went to school in a small town in Washington. As you might expect, there wasn't a lot to do, especially during the summer. One night I was feeling especially mischievous. I had gotten it in my head that we should break into this abandoned monkey research facility that's on the other side of town. My friends were initially hesitant, and they thought it was a bad idea. Of course it was. That was the point. There were 3 of us, and we spent a couple of hours playing video games until we became bored. Soon after they changed their mind, so we waited until dark and started our grand adventure. We walked across town since none of us had a car yet, and we took a trail with a big red sign that read, "No trespassing." After that, all we had to do was cut across some fields, and there it was. The creepiest building within walking distance. It was a large building with 4 floors, and 4 wings on each floor. All the entrances were locked, so we had to find a more creative way in. The back side of the building had a balcony on the 2nd floor. In order to reach it, we had to climb onto a metal shipping crate by hoisting each other up. Then we had to shimmy across a ledge a couple of feet until we could get onto the balcony. Luckily, none of us were afraid of heights. I was the first to make it onto the balcony, and I'll admit I was pretty uncomfortable while I waited for my friends to make the climb. There was an open doorway with complete darkness on the inside. I shined my flashlight in with excitement, but also fear. What had I gotten ourselves into? My friends managed to join me on the balcony and we all walked in together. As soon as we enter, We realized that we should have brought masks or at least something else to put over our faces. It smells absolutely terrible inside, and surely there had to have been asbestos. The halls were lined with cages that used to hold monkeys. I'd never seen anything like it before. The floors were covered in rubble and glass and crackled beneath our feet. It was easy to let our imaginations get the best of us in a place like this, and none of us wanted to be at the back of the group. We explore the second floor and the main floor pretty quickly, and we take a brief detour to the basement until we realize how flooded it was. There was knee-high murky green water at the bottom of the steps leading down there. So instead, we decided to go to the third floor. But this is when we heard something. Hearing anything that wasn't us definitely made our hair stand up. We followed the noise until we discovered the source. It was a speaker making a continuous crackling noise. The speaker was in what looked to be like a children's playroom, but obviously it had been made for monkeys. There were old toys laying around and the walls had cartoonish clowns on what was left of the wallpaper. I took this opportunity to take out the spray paint cans I'd stole from my dad's tool bench. I graffitied pretty much exactly what you would expect a teenage boy to draw, all over the clowns. All of a sudden my friend said, "Stop, I hear something." We immediately stopped what we were doing and we listened intently. We wait for about 5 minutes in complete silence. We then heard a loud slam come from the floor below us. This was followed by somebody moving something around. My stomach dropped and I could see my friends' faces turning white. We had to leave, and fast. If we encounter whoever was in here, best case scenario, we take a ride in a police car. Worst case scenario, we run into somebody that we shouldn't have. We are on the third floor and whatever we heard is somewhere below us. We can't go down the stairs because that's likely the fastest way we will run into whoever is in here. So we decide to get on the roof and hide, or see if we could find another way down. Luckily, we found the ladder. It was a bit of a jump down to the roof of the second-story balcony, but our adrenaline was pumping. From there, we slipped down into the balcony, shimmied our way back across the ledge, and off the metal crate. We run into the woods, where we now have a huge sigh of relief that we were home free. As we were resting in the brush, we could see that there wasn't any police cars outside of the building, or any cars at all. That was the scariest part of the entire experience, because until then, all I could hope for was that we were running away from the police. It was the summer of 2016. My family and I had just moved to my new house after the passing of our stepfather. I don't know anybody in the neighborhood. One night, I think in July, my mom went out with some friends. She was so hesitant at first, I still remember. I encouraged her to go out since she hadn't been out since his passing. I kept telling her, "Go, Mom, go out, we'll be fine." Turns out that wasn't true. I was 14 back then, and I was left responsible to watch my two younger siblings. We'll call them Zoe and Steve. Steve was 12, Zoe was 10. I'd been in charge of watching them before, so this wasn't really a big deal. My mom said that she'd be back by 11 p.m. the latest. So fast forward to about 10 p.m., Steve and I were watching horror movies, and Zoe had gone to bed 30 minutes before. Steve and I both love horror movies, and this time we were watching the Scream trilogy. At 10:30, my dog was whining to go out. I really didn't want to because the good part was coming up. "Pause it," I told Steve. He did, so I put my dog on a leash and let him outside to do his business. Just to let you know, he isn't exactly a large dog. It had been about 5 minutes and he had already gone to pee and he was just sniffing. "Come on, Buster, let's go," I told him. Suddenly his head jerked up. He started growling and immediately runs towards something in the dark. Now, I got frightened as I thought it was a bear, but I saw something black in the corner of my eye and it went around my house. I definitely thought it was a bear, however. I grabbed my dog, ran inside my house as fast as possibly as I could. I then slammed the door shut. My brother questioned why I was being so weird, and I told him there was a bear. I now try to forget it, and for the rest of the movie, it worked. At 11:30, Steve went to bed. My mom still hadn't come home yet. No problem for me, so I just turned on another horror movie. I don't remember what this one was about. It had gotten so late, almost 1 a.m., I thought it was just my paranoia when I heard knocking around my house. I shut off the movie and switched to cartoons. SpongeBob. At this moment, I really had to pee, so I got up and went. Now, as some context, my bathroom is kinda small, and it also has a sunroof on top of it. At this moment, I was surprised because I see somebody looking back at me through the roof, wearing all black. I let out a scream, and this is when they disappeared. Naturally, I called the police and stumbled on my own words. "Please, help," I begged them. I remember him trying to open my front door, but thankfully I had locked it. He tried to wiggle the handle, and then he ended up stopping a short time later. I remember I hadn't locked the back door, however, but there was no way in heck I would go back there with all the lights off. I just had to wait 5 minutes for the police to come. I grabbed a fire poker at this moment and I hid in my closet, locking my bedroom door and my closet door, making sure Steve and Zoe and my dog were with me. They were so close to screaming, I had to cover their mouths the entire time. Of course, they were crying, and I probably was about to as well. I heard them slam into my bedroom door and open it, and my sister let out a cry. Then pounding on my closet door began. Zoe cried even louder. The door opened to reveal a man about 6'5" and about 200 pounds. He was covered head to toe in black with a ski mask over his head, revealing his almost black eyes. Luckily, I heard sirens. The man looked at me, cursed, and then ran, smashing my window. I hugged my siblings as tight as I could as we ran to the police. We told them everything, and they caught the man after about 20 minutes of searching. The police stayed with us until my mom came home. Since then, I still stay home alone, but now my dog uses a pee pad and I don't watch horror movies anymore. I don't remember how long the guy got in jail, but I think it was over 5 years, and I couldn't be happier. I'm a 24-year-old male and I live in West Michigan. I have my whole life, and I grew up on some 60-some acres about 20 minutes from Lake Michigan. I grew up in a small town where hunting and fishing has always been a huge part of my life, a passion of mine, and for the most part it keeps me out of trouble. This particular incident happened 3 years ago in the Allegan Woods. I started working in Holland, Michigan, a decent 45-minute drive south from where I lived. I was working in a shop down there for about 3 years, and it was this time of the year, March, when the steelheads start to run up the rivers to spawn. For those of you who don't know what a steelhead is, it's a big rainbow trout that grows up in the rivers and then goes out into Lake Michigan. After 3 years, it comes back to the creek, or a river where it was born. Almost like a salmon, except a steelhead doesn't die after it spawns. These are by far my favorite fish to catch because of the difficulty and the fight that these fish can put up. Plus, it gets my heart going a million miles an hour. So, working in Holland, a guy there had offered to take me out fishing on the Kalamazoo and the Rabbit River, both of which I have never fished before, and I jumped at the chance to try out a new spot. So, the guy, we will call him Mark, took me out after work and showed me a few really promising looking spots, one which I really liked the look of. He called it Horseshoe Bend, and it was on private property that he had permission to go on. I'd met the guy also, and I asked if it would be okay if I came out the next morning by myself. He said, "Any friend of Mark's is a friend of mine." At Horseshoe Bend, you could cast out at your 2 o'clock and float your bobber all the way around to your 8 o'clock, and you can make some really nice and long casts. I stayed at Mark's house that night as I didn't feel like driving the hour and a half home at 8 at night to turn around early the next morning to go out fishing. Mark was also my supervisor, so he knew I was taking a personal day the next day. Now, I had never heard about these so-called people I was told about. I looked online after my experience, and apparently in the 1970s, people had escaped an insane asylum and lived in the Allegan Woods, inbreeding and attacking people too. The Allegan Woods is huge and lots of bad things have happened in that huge expanse of wilderness. So anyway, I head out in the morning and I caught a nice steelhead on my second cast out of Horseshoe. I was thinking how this was going to be an awesome day. No work, just being out in the middle of nowhere, slaying fish. It was about 8:30ish and I started to hear what sounded like a woodpecker. I didn't pay any attention to it, but after a few minutes I thought that it sounded a bit off. It was like a woodpecker, but a bit slower, and instead of a fast rat tap tap, it was a steady tap, 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 and it sounded to be about 100 yards to my 9 o'clock. Well, with that side of the bank being 40 feet or so high, there is no way to see over it. I wasn't alarmed at all, so I kept fishing. Then, a few minutes later, I heard a tap, 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 coming from down the stream about 200 yards. It started to get closer, and I found this to be a bit strange, since I've never heard woodpeckers move and tap like that. It's at this moment I started to get that feeling that makes your hair stand up on the back of your neck. As I'm typing this, reliving what happened next is what's making my skin crawl. I felt like I was being watched. I was a good half a mile away from where I had parked my truck, and from what I had seen the day before, quite a ways away from anyone. I made another cast and splash. A tiny rock or something landed in the water to my left. By this time, all the tapping had stopped. I set my pole down and I grabbed a knife out of my backpack, and I put it into my pocket, which made me feel a little bit better, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I heard a little rustling sound and I looked up to see something duck down across the bank. Now I started to get really nervous, but after a few minutes of nothing, I chalked it up to it being a squirrel or bird, and I felt kinda dumb for getting nervous over nothing. But what happened next wasn't nothing. I hooked a fish and it was fighting really good, and I was trying not to let it go downstream under this log jam, and I was 100% focused on fighting the fish. I tightened down my drag, trying to keep it from going under, and the fish started to spin, and the hook came out. I had a few choice words, but I was cut short when I heard something laughing like an absolute insane person. I looked up, shocked to see a man in dirty clothes laughing, and this almost made me piss my pants being so far away from anyone. This guy wasn't out here fishing, that was for sure. He was on top of the bank at the other side to my 9 o'clock, and I just froze, but then I realized that he couldn't do anything being at the top of the hill. I also noticed that he was probably one of the most interesting looking persons I've ever seen in my life. Seriously looked like one of those people from the hills have eyes. But then at that moment, I heard a large splash from about 100 yards downstream. I turned to look to see another man starting to wade across the river, and then the other guy started to slide down the hill into the water. I knew I had to get out of there because the other guy was going to flank me. I dropped everything and I ran the fastest and longest I'd ever ran in my life back to that guy's house. There I was finally able to calm down, and I tell Matt, the landowner, what had happened. We called the police, and when they got there, Matt, myself, and 2 police officers went out to where I was fishing, and of course all of my things and my fish I had on my stringer were gone, but I didn't care. I was just happy to be safe. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and I got a phone call from a random phone number. It was Matt, the landowner, who then informed me that the day before, 2 other fishermen were fishing not too far from where this happened to me, and they had a similar experience where they called the cops. But this time, the cops came across a makeshift campsite/home where more than one person had been living for some time. They never did find those 2 lunatics, but they did find my fishing pole and my backpack, and the officer had dropped it off at Matt's house and informed him on what had happened, since he was one of the cops who was out there with us when that happened to me. I told Matt he could just keep it because I never wanted to go back there ever again. To this day, I have never fished anywhere near the Allegan Woods and never plan to again. Looking back on this, I feel incredibly dumb for not telling any of the staff or teachers about what I saw this night. We could have had a genuinely dangerous situation, and I did nothing about it. It wasn't the most scary thing to happen to anyone, but definitely one of the most scary things to happen to me. To provide a little bit of backstory to the setting of this story, my high school holds a camp for each year for the youngest year level and takes them out on a farm property they own for 3 weeks. The whole point of this camp is for the students to be self-sufficient and not rely on adults or teachers to take care of ourselves. This took place in the final week of the camp, on a night called Solo Night. The teachers took us out to a separate property from the one we stayed at the rest of the camp. Interesting things happened there too, but this is the most unnerving. On a farm which friends of the school owned, we went onto a field of land covered in shrubs and trees, but very far away from any other civilization, apart from the owners of the farm. There were 20 of us, plus 4 staff members, and we were split up into single tents along the perimeter of the field, just far enough apart to not be able to see each other through the trees. We could set up as close or as far away from the fence as we wanted to, however. I would call it a forested area, if it weren't for the copious amounts of sand and dirt in between it all, and the plain grassy area surrounding the fence line. It wasn't a particularly big area, and was surrounded on all sides by more fields, and we were deep enough in the farm which there was no logical way apart from cars to get to the road. Ironically and unplanned, this night took place on Halloween of 2018. My friends and I had jokingly brought costumes, not knowing it'd be solo night that night, so I had a really dumb witch's hat to wear, which of course I ended up wearing. Since there were no toilets, I wandered out into the woods to go to the bathroom every now and then. There was a small hill which nobody else had seemed to go over to, or put their tent far enough away from the fence line. So when I went up there, you could see my next 2 neighbors' tents that were through the trees. Overall, it was a pretty nice view from up there, and looking the other way would be even better, since you could go up to these larger hills and get a better view. We were in the middle of nowhere, and since I live in the city, I never have a good view of the night sky, hence why I came up with the brilliant idea of coming out here at night to get a better look. The sun set reasonably late, so I'd have to wait a long time before actually doing this. It wasn't a huge area, so feasibly I couldn't get lost. Plus, I had a flashlight, and the only other people out there should have been classmates like me, being dumb and exploring out at night. Our backup plan for there being no way to get the teacher's attention was that we all had whistles around our neck. We would use these to call for help. Around 11:30 p.m. that night, I stepped out of the tent with a flashlight, and I began climbing up the hill behind me. Despite being small, each hill was very steep, with ditches around and areas filled with trees and areas of plain grass. From looking on top of the hill, nobody else's tent lights were on, so that would mean that nobody should be out here. Continuing, I went down the hill and stumbled across a path in the shrubs. Continuing, I walked down the trail further and up to the next hill. I'd already stumbled over a tree branch and a small hole, and I fell around twice, and my nerves were starting to get the best of me. I regretted my decision to do this already, but I figured the view should have been worth the wait in the end. I had a terrible digital watch which told me it was almost 12 by the time I heard something next, the sound of what seemed to be quiet footsteps behind me. I told myself it was just an animal and kept walking, and I'd never been more glad I did. I was probably almost hidden by the surrounding trees and tall bushes, although there was no way my light was completely obscured. A crack of a branch being stepped on, not 10 feet behind me, was heard. My heart stopped and I turned off my flashlight. I didn't care to look behind me because there was definitely someone there, and I was too afraid to look. I remember I kept telling myself it had to be an animal, but it wasn't. This was definitely a human being, and I was now hiding from them. As I stood there hiding, and the footsteps eventually got quieter, I decided to look, hoping and expecting to see it was a classmate wandering around. I nearly screamed when I realized that the figure was a lot taller than any of my classmates. The tallest one in our group was about 6'1", and she's my best friend. This man was taller than that. Now, just so we get one thing straight, our group is all girls. None of the teachers or staff were male. So there's that. My heart was pounding as they kept going, not realizing I was there hiding. Overall, I have to say I didn't have the best view of them, just a dark, tall, and bulky shadow of what was clearly a man. Terrified, I scrambled up to the next hill, trying to get as far away from whoever this person was as possible. As I tripped and scraped myself against countless trees and shrubs, I cursed myself as I ended up getting some cuts. My flashlight was still off, and I had no desire to turn it back on again as I kept going on into the night. The whole encounter lasted less than 5 minutes, but it still took me the best part of an hour to gather up the courage to walk back to my tent. The only thing on the way back confirming I'd saw someone were the footprints in the sand and dirt walking along the same trail and further into the shrubs and woods. I ran back to my tent and barely slept the rest of that night. I didn't even have the heart to bring it up to the staff the next morning, in fear of being told off for being out so late. Later in the camp, other people came forward saying they heard footsteps walking around their tents that night, saying they'd even heard loud crunching on leaves and branches around them before they'd move on in the night. It kept them awake, and they blamed the teachers for patrolling, or even other students for playing pranks. The teachers said none of them went out of their tents last night after 8 since there were no distress calls. None of the students said they were there either. I asked them if there were any other men at the farm who could have been with us, and to my horror, they said the farm was run by a lady and that all her workers went home every night. It was just her and her husband, which the husband was in the city at the time. I hate thinking about it, and I only told 2 of my friends, one who also went out, albeit earlier that night. They reported seeing a silhouette of somebody in the bushes, but managed to convince themselves that they were just seeing things. I think about this event and how badly it could have gone. What if the man had approached me or my friend? What if they had unzipped one of my classmates' tents and done something? I guess I'll never know the intentions of that man who seemingly just walked around and stared at some teenagers in tents for no reason or motive. I only know one thing for certain. I never want to do that again. Some of the stories in this video might be disturbing for some audiences. This is one of the stories that we covered that might be disturbing. For context, it mentions wanting to do a sexual act to someone, but doesn't go into graphic details regarding that. So if that's something you can't handle, then feel free to use the timestamps in the pinned comment and skip the story. If you're okay with listening to something like that, then here's that story. This story took place when I was 24 years old. I was out of the army and back in university. I went to school in a large city in Texas, and to make some extra cash, I decided to do some driving for Lyft. Just 1 or 2 trips here and there, because I hate driving and admittedly I'm not really good at it. Sorry to all of those who I drove around. One Friday, I decided to do a bit more driving than normal. I had a fare take me to the center of the city, where I usually avoided. They were pleasant customers, don't get me wrong, from what I remember. As the hour was approaching midnight, I decided to call it a day and head home. Right before I turned the app off, I received a ride request from a profile called, I kid you not, X. In retrospect, all the alarm bells in my head should have deterred me before ever taking the job, but I took it nonetheless. Plus, the ride was only about 15 minutes, and it was on my way back home. I figured, why not? What could be the harm? So, I accepted what could have very well have been my very last ride with Lyft. The request was for one person to be picked up from a hotel and brought to a club. I arrived at the hotel, where a large man was waiting outside. When I signaled to him, He in turn signaled back to some people who were waiting in the lobby. No alarm bells ringing for obvious reasons yet. It was 4 large men. Now, when I say they were large, they all looked like they towered over my comparatively small 5'9" frame, and all of them had gigantic muscled arms. They all squished into my SUV. Immediately they were rowdy, obnoxious, rude, and obviously drunk. I figured since they were already in my car, the best thing to do would be just to take them to their destination and get it over with. As we set off, their loud cackling made me extremely tense. As I said, I'm a bad driver, and having this giant in my passenger seat constantly hitting my arm really put me on edge. I did offer them an auxiliary cord, hoping that would calm them down a bit, but unfortunately it did not. The guy in the seat behind me plugged in his phone and started playing some really bad music. The guy in the passenger seat cranked up the music to ear-splitting levels. By this point, my discomfort must have been obvious. The one who was playing the music started to ask me things like, "Come on, don't you like this? This is good stuff. What, you don't like my music?" That was the least annoying, mainly because I could barely hear them over the music. It went on like that until we reached the destination, which turned out to be a shady-looking gentleman's club. To my relief, they all got out. But the worst part is they didn't tip. Just kidding, that was very far from the worst part. After that annoying and scary experience, I felt an overwhelming need to decompress, so I sat in my car for a little bit and turned my own music up. I started to cry and had to talk myself down from having a panic attack. Eyes closed, focusing on my music to calm down, I suddenly hear what will go down as probably the scariest noise in my life. It was the sound of my door closing. I had left my car doors unlocked, and in my haze of panic I had not even heard the door open, or all 4 of the large men got back into my car. The sound of the car door closing finally snapped me out of the haze. If you've ever felt a panic attack, you might be able to understand how all of that could have happened without me noticing. Immediately I freaked the heck out. I screamed at them, saying, "Get out! Get out! What are you doing?" The guy in my passenger seat said angrily, "This is ridiculous. They wouldn't even let us in." "I don't care. Get out of my car. That's not my problem. Get out of my car," I yelled. "Give us a ride somewhere else," he said. "No. Are you kidding me?" I replied. "Come on, you gave us a ride here. I'll pay you to take us somewhere else," he said. "Just order another ride. Our ride is over," I pleaded. I could see there was no arguing with these entitled people. I couldn't think of anything to do besides just take them somewhere else. Stupid, I know, but I really didn't see any other option to get them out of my car without getting attacked, or worse. As we set off this time, the mood inside the car was noticeably different. They were angry. They were loudly complaining about the club and the city before ultimately turning their ire toward me. I was speeding at about 95 in a 75, just hoping to get pulled over. I had stumbled into the perfect excuse. You see, I was being kidnapped. The one who was sitting directly behind me leaned forward, putting his mouth directly into my ear, and yelled at the top of his voice. I still get vivid flashbacks of the sheer ear-splitting fear, as well as his gross hot breath making my hair curl. "Why are you driving so fast? Are you trying to get rid of us? We're only getting started tonight. What, you don't want to spend time with us? You think you're too good or what?" He hurled insults at me, causing his friends to join in. The one in my passenger seat began to hit and grab my arm, causing me to jerk and swerve on the highway. I was helpless and panicking, but I couldn't do anything but drive. The others joined in yelling insults at me, and they got progressively more terrifying. One of them started saying things like, "I bet you're so scared right now. Look at you. I like when they get scared. It's more exciting. How I would love to sleep with you." How's that sound? Ever had 4 guys at once? How about you pull over, huh babe? It only got worse from there. They started talking amongst themselves about what they wanted to do to me. Disturbing details. I don't need to elaborate on that. I'm sure your imagination can fill in. In the midst of my fear at hearing these men talk about me like I was their prey, I feel a sharp jab on the back of my arm, then the cold of a blade running up and down my arm. One of the guys in the back was caressing me with a knife. They laughed and snarled at me as they began to talk about how after they were finished with me, they were going to kill me. Then just like that, we arrived at the place they wanted to go. I said nothing as they got out of my car, but before they could even shut the doors, I peeled away, hoping I'd run over a foot or two. I stopped at the nearest gas station to freak out again. Looking back, I really don't understand why they did all of that, since they did just get out of my car once we arrived. So why torment me like that? I'll never understand, but I still feel ripples of that night on my psyche and in my behavior to this day. The one funny thing about that night is when I was cleaning out my car after the event, I reached under the seat and pulled out a roll of cash, presumably meant for whatever sex worker was unfortunate enough to encounter them. Now, there is actually a reason for my constant obliviousness, gullibility, and overly trusting nature, but I don't want to share because it's a bit too personal. Sorry. Sometimes I feel like it turns my whole life into a horror story, but as of now I feel that I'm very, not lucky exactly, but more surprised to be alive. This event took place a few months into the lockdowns back in March of 2020, and with my mother passing from it, I wasn't exactly in the best place. To relax my mind a bit, I would go for long walks at the local beach and do a little drinking in the process. One night in particular, it was almost midnight when a car pulled into the parking lot of the beach and headed straight for me. I didn't pay much attention to it as people would occasionally do a midnight stroll at the beach like me. This car, however, seemed to have an intention other than walking due to it pulling up right next to me. The passenger side being the closest had its windows rolled down, and inside I could identify them to be college-looking kids. "Hey," the passenger said. "Hey," I responded. We sort of remained there staring and observing each other for about a minute. Breaking the silence, the passenger says, "You want to ride to the liquor store?" At this point in the night, I had a few drinks in me and I didn't have the best judgment, which is probably the reason for what happened to me later. "Yeah." I hopped into the car to find there was a third guy in the back seat. The third guy was very unpredictable, as in he would be kicking the seat in frustration, sort of like a little kid, and other times he would act mature and patient. It was like he had some sort of multi-personality disorder. After some driving, we didn't stop at a liquor store. Instead, we were at the end of a run-down lot surrounded by woods on all sides. The purpose of the parking lot was for those who wanted to walk down a bicycle path that it was connected to and was perfect for hosting suspicious activity as it was poorly lit and had no cameras. After the three men got out, the driver opens my door and yanks me out and holds my arms up. While I was being held, the passenger said, "Well, would you like to give the first strike today, Jack?" Jack, or the guy who was in the back seat with me, becomes ecstatic and gets closer, ready to land a punch. He looks at my stomach, winds up a punch, and throws it. Next thing I know, he yelps in pain and moves backwards as the passenger screams, "What the heck?" As a result of being picked on for many years and beaten up in school, I designed my own body armor by layering the inside of my sweatshirt with thin rocks and securing them into place with stitches. I took this opportunity of everybody being stunned to give the driver holding me a headbutt with the back of my head. As soon as I broke free, the passenger right-hooked me in the temple and pulled a switchblade and slashed at my chest. At this point, I knew I was outnumbered, and I had to run. Booking it into the woods, I could hear the passenger screaming things like, "Come back so I can give you something to remember this night forever." I never looked back. It wasn't until I made it into downtown I took a breather inside a 24/7 CVS. The emptiness in my pockets made my heart sink as I realized that I must have dropped my phone while running through the woods. I didn't tell my dad until the following morning about what happened. He didn't believe me until I showed him the slash mark left on my sweatshirt. He understood that a peaceful beach walk couldn't have caused that even if I had been drinking. Thankfully, using my dad's phone finder app, we were able to successfully track down my phone, which luckily they didn't find. Something to take away from this story is to always have your guard up and don't get into strangers' cars. Everybody reading this, please stay safe and healthy. So my scary story starts when I was 27. Just to give some context, I'm currently 29 years old and I weigh 290 pounds and I'm 6'4". So 2 years ago, I worked at a mill and myself and a co-worker, which we will call Jim, worked as security as night shift. So one night we're watching cameras and we're playing around with paper pens. While we were just messing with them, we saw a figure at the corner of our eyes on the cameras, so we looked and saw what seemed to be a shadow. As we checked the other cameras, we noticed it was just a mop and hanger, so we wrote the whole situation off as nothing more than shadows playing tricks on us. Later that night, we saw something move in the dark, so I sent my co-worker Jim to go check while I watched him on the cameras. He radioed back and said that there was nothing, so while being just a bit creeped out, we continued with our shift as normal. Later, we heard a loud bang as if a crowbar or axe hit a piece of sheet metal, so we both ran over to check, and we saw a man roughly looking in his late 40s, looking around 6'6", holding an axe. My co-worker Jim calmly said, "This is private property. You have to get out or we're going to call the cops." The man just stood there looking at us and said that if we wanted him out, we would have to do it ourselves. Seconds after stating this, he started to walk toward us. Now, all we had was a taser and pepper spray, so we each decided to book it to the room and called the cops, and we also let our boss know that there was a homeless man in the mill. After we called the cops, we looked to see if he was near or close to the room on the cameras. After we checked and saw nothing, we told police that we saw nothing near our room. After that, the police arrived shortly after, and after we gave our statements, and a short time after that, they caught the man inside the mill. We were relieved. After all that, I still work there to this day. I now carry, and I now have a wife and 2 girls that I love very much. First off, I've been subscribed to your channel for 4 months. I don't know what took YouTube so ridiculously long to recommend you to me, given I've been subscribed to other channels, but here I am. I just finished watching your personal story regarding your tumor, and man, you went through a lot. My respect to you and the love and strength you showed. I've had 2 operations on my person in the last 10 years, but yours exceeded both mine combined. Alas, ultimately, this is for a scary stories video, so here's my scary story. Here is where I begin. So for a brief time, I lived in the northern part of Carson, California, off the 405 freeway. When you think of cities, you don't think of coyotes. Yet if you think about it, as we humans continually invade and arguably decimate other animals' habitat, naturally they're going to come into our space too. And on a chilly night in April of 2012, that's exactly what happened. I just gotten off of the then 45 bus that ends in Carson, and I was walking through the park. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I step into one of the few areas of the park I cut through to get home, which has a lamp. I heard faint footsteps. Then I see it, an intelligent face with a snout, 4 legs, and gray-brownish fur. I knew it was a coyote. Then another appeared on the right, then the left, then another 2 right behind. A grand total of 5 coyotes had shown up, encircling me in a half-circle formation. I knew it was a pack, and I knew at the very least I was going to be checked out, if not outright hunted. Knowing I was in a potential bad way, I went through my options. Clearly, with my bad knees, I couldn't run. They'd catch up to me anyway. Then I remembered someone saying someplace that if you stood your ground and acted aggressive, they might not bother with you. I had a laptop bag with me with my laptop in it, so I stomped my foot aggressively and said, "Get," in a very loud and angry sounding voice, at the same time swinging my laptop bag around my head. Amazingly, it ultimately had the desired effect. The leader, called an alpha I think, turned around. So did the other coyotes. They all disappeared and disappeared as quickly as they came. Not the scariest situation, arguably, but had they decided to attack, I'd have been in serious trouble, quite possibly costing me my life.
Hey everyone, so that was the last story for today. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. And as I mentioned before, if this is the first time you're joining us and you did enjoy what you heard, well, do yourself a favor. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. And if you want to be notified of all the future uploads, make sure to turn on that notification bell as well. And I just want to go ahead and give a quick thank you to every single one of the subscribers that I was able to work with. This, as you guys know, the Creepy Fox Scary Stories podcast, well, it would not be possible without the help and assistance of all the subscribers who reach out to me and who want to collaborate with me for future episodes. Without you guys, this show wouldn't be what it is today. Now, as you guys heard today, this was a collection of some of the best scary stories that we've covered here on the channel so far. I specifically hand-selected these as they kind of cover that, I guess, I've had some people say it's like the golden era of my channel, which is like that 2017 to like 2022, 2023 era before YouTube started to suppress all my videos and now a lot of people don't watch. But some of the stories actually, so there is a couple of them today. So one of them towards the beginning, which was the Wildfire story. It was that story where one of our subscribers, we talk about the time that they're involved in that wildfire from back in the early 2000s. I actually remember that. I remember I was in junior high school at the time. I live in Orange County, and at the time I was going to junior high school. They ended up canceling school for like a few days because the ash, it got really bad. Like, it got bad where like you couldn't really go outside because it burned to breathe everything. Like, although we were quite a distance away, like the winds ended up pushing all the ash and everything, the smoke. So I remember not really going outside at the time. I remember we ended up buying like air filtration systems and not obviously not going outside. And I remember it well because like that was at the time I had gotten my GameCube for the first time. So I was playing like Super Mario Sunshine and Spyro at the time. But yeah, we weren't allowed to go outside because of how bad the ash was. I did have a couple of friends, so you know, in the story, this subscriber, I did have a couple of friends who actually had to evacuate by the time they were involved, where they were like really that close. Thankfully, they didn't lose their home, but you know, that was one. Which also I wanted to mention that this story, I've actually featured it before. Originally, that Wildfire story, it was a channel members video, but it's remained a channel members video for, it's been a while. It's been a few years, and so I figured, you know, now is the time for those of you who haven't joined channel memberships. I thought I'd go ahead and give you guys that this story to listen to. Another story that really, this one was a classic one. It was the Monkey Research Facility story. That one was towards I can't speak. This one was towards the end of the episode where our friends, they urban explore into a factory and they kind of go over what they saw and experienced. And I don't know about you guys, but something about urban exploration stories, just the fact that like, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do so anyway because I got my bad knee. I can barely go up steps and climb stuff, but just the fact of like going to an abandoned place where you could be attacked by like some crazy person. Still just the fact of like the overall creepiness of like dilapidated buildings and just the overall danger behind that. That story specifically really got to me. And like I said, this one was a classic one because I remember the subscriber that sent it to me. This was all the way back in 2017. So that was actually one of the earliest subscriber stories that I've ever gotten. So like I said, that one was an interesting one. I just wanted to go ahead and kind of just give you guys a couple thoughts of the stories today. I mean, let me know down below which one of these stories was the ones that you guys enjoyed the most. We featured I think like 21 stories today, so I'm sure there's stories that you guys enjoyed. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to the subscribers that watched. Thank you. Oh, real quickly before we end the video, I just wanted to update you guys with the video schedule. So as you guys saw today, I'm recording this around 12:30 at night. I'm most likely gonna get this video up later today as I speak. So when you hear this, this will be up later tonight. And next up, I'm gonna see, because I'm obviously doing this video, which is a 2.5-hour episode of no mid-roll ads. I do have a 3-hour video I have planned. I already have the stories already recorded. They're already there, ready to be put I have the gameplay and everything and the music and the sound effects, so I just gotta kind of put everything together. But I kind of want to see things because, and this was something I spoke with some subscriber friends of mine, that it seems like everyone that was watching the no ads videos, I'm not sure what happened, but the overwhelming majority of people just, they left. I mean, I have a feeling it's two things. It's either, as we know, YouTube likes to suppress my videos, so there's possibility and a chance that a lot of these subscribers just simply, they don't get my videos in their feed. Or, as I suspect, maybe they just, maybe people just don't really care for the scary stories, no ads videos anymore, and people don't really care for these, which I really hope is not the case, because like I said, it's weird seeing comments. I know how much people like these, but then it's like I'll put them out and then barely anyone watches them. But we'll see, like I said, because that 3-hour video I have planned, I do want to make that no mid-roll ads as well, but depends. Like I said, if this video does well, you guys watch it and support it, then yeah, I'll go ahead and do that 3-hour episode with no mid-roll ads. But if not, I'll probably just put a couple of mid-roll ads there as well, because well, doing the no mid-roll ads, it's tough because, you know, this is something I'm doing. I actually started doing this full-time again, so since I'm dedicating all this time to this, I want to make sure that, you know, I'm giving you guys videos and content that you guys want to see and listen to. Oh, last thing, if you guys missed the previous video, that was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Stories video. Now, I know a lot of people saw the title and the thumbnail, and they're like, ugh, cartoon Yu-Gi-Oh! It sucks because like a lot of people had a misconception. So it was still a scary stories video. It was still like, what, a half hour of scary stories? It's just, it so happened that it happened. The stories and the experiences, the creepy things, they happen to people who are like Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans. Like, for example, the first story was about a card vendor. He sells Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, and then one day, this man like shoots a gun at him and like actually almost shoots him dead, right? Which is pretty insane to think about. And then there's like a couple other ones where it's like there's a stalker, they have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card, and that person wants their card because it's like a rare card and all this. So again, give it a listen, even if you're not a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, those stories were pretty good and it was a pretty fun one to make. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and start editing this and putting it all together for you all. Again, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I will catch you guys on the next one, hopefully soon. Until then, take care. Have yourself an amazing night or day or whenever you're watching this. Bye.